Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to what life was like in Paris under Nazi rule. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Paris, summer 1940. The light is so clear it almost hurts. A rinsed blue sky over pale stone. On the wide stretch of the Champs-Élysées, you stand with others as metal floods the boulevard, motorcycles buzzing like hornets, armored cars rumbling, boots finding a single rhythm on cobblestones. Somewhere behind you, a shopkeeper slips a tricolor from his window and hurriedly folds it. Ahead, on government facades, new banners uncoil, red, white, black. The swastika heavy against limestone. You can smell oil and hot rubber, and beyond that, something sour you do not name. You are here, and the odds aren't in your favor. The parade looks endless, machine-made, helmets gleam, bayonets catch shards of sunlight, faces in the crowd tilt upward and then away. Some avert their eyes, others, especially the young, stare as if trying to memorize every insignia, every stripe of leather. An old man near you mutters about 1871. He saw Prussians once, he says, and now here they are again, history's clock repeating its chime. The Champs-Élysées seems longer than it has ever been, a stage set for conquerors, and Paris, unwilling, cast as audience. How did it happen so fast in May and June? The German thrust punched past the Maginot imagination, and the estates seems a split. Refugees cartloads of mattresses, bird cages. Children clutching dolls poured south until roads clogged like arteries. You remember that weak air that tasted of dust and petrol, notices ungluing from walls in the heat. A decision you made by doing nothing. You stayed. Many did. Now the city is a diaphragm that refuses to expand. It just holds its breath while engines idle beneath the Arc de Triomphe. You try to imagine the silence in the room when Marshal Pétain Verdun's rock asked for an armistice. Some call him savior, sparing further slaughter. Others whisper traitor, handing the nation's dignity across a desk. In queues, the debate already smells stale. Either way, the country splits a line drawn across maps and families. The occupied zone above and Vichy's free zone below. A euphemism that tastes like chicory on the tongue, almost coffee, but not. You picture that demarcation line like a scar, healing badly. The city redistributes itself under chalk. You watch soldiers mark doors and ledgers, requisition, commandeer, relocate. Hotels shed their velvet to become nerves and fists. The Hotel Majestic chills into headquarters. The Ritz fills with uniforms instead of artists. Clerks arrive with measuring tapes for rooms and with stencils for signs. A concierge you've known for years stares through you like a photograph. You inhale the diesel from passing lorries and wonder if leaving would have been braver or just another kind of surrender. By evening, rumor moves faster than any staff car. Hitler in Paris at dawn, architects in tow. A tour done like a thief, swift, selective, surgical. Some claim he loved the city. Others say he preferred to keep it as a trophy, proof by preservation. People argue about intent because it's safer than arguing about power. You stand by the Seine and watch the current carry gossip under bridges like driftwood, each rumor bumping the stone and spinning away. The river keeps its own counsel. Shops on the Rue de Rivoli shutter early, metal grills slamming with a new finality. A cafe owner swears he will serve whoever pays tomorrow. His wife tucks his sleeve and lowers his voice for him. In the cafes, you learn caution quickly. A week ago, the air was a market of opinions. Tonight, conversation is a private currency spent carefully. Even laughter has a muzzle. Someone jokes that the metropole has become a village of owls, living by touch in the blackout. The joke dies in a hurry because humor now is another form of paperwork. Blackout orders arrive with the speed of an order shouted on a parade ground cover windows. Shade lamps extinguish cigarettes. The city of light retunes itself to darkness. It stumbles at curbs it used to step over without thinking. Children bump their shins and feel it as a new lesson. Somewhere a sentry sings a tune from home, the vowels harsh to your ear and oddly tender. You wonder whether they feel victorious or merely exhausted boys on a school trip that cost the world too much. Morning brings lists and the hush that follows reading. Notices pasted on stone demand apartments and offices, announce commandeered, require inventories. Neighbors crowd the paper, count aloud without numbers. Bread, petrol, beds, ink, dignity. A baker in Montmartre sighs as his flour is claimed for needs of the army. Already the commons is rationed. What is yours is available. What is theirs is decided. Outside his shop, the line lengthens and lengthens again. Patience, you discover, is a muscle you will overuse. Some Parisians pivot with appalling grace. A hairdresser stencils friseur beneath coiffeur and sweeps his doorstep twice as often. A grocer rearranges his window to neutrality, neither tricolor nor eagle, just potatoes. Under someone's breath, you hear collabo, the syllables a bruise. Another voice replies, we must survive. The line between pragmatism and betrayal is a thread drawn across a sharp edge. Everyone is walking it in wooden soles. Down by the Louvre, the doors hold their breath. You know the Astory curators who moved treasures like evacuees in 1939, truck after truck into the Loire's stone lungs. In the emptied palace, you can imagine ghosts where canvases once breathed, pale rectangles traceable even in imagination. You smirk despite yourself somewhere. Far from those echoing galleries, the Mona Lisa smiles in a straw like a queen in exile. Small victories, invisible and necessary. Time itself mutinies. The public clocks are nudged to German time, and you feel the day sit wrong in its chair. You wake later, but do not. Shadows shift to a stranger's schedule. Even the sun seems requisitioned. On the metro, gray-green uniforms compress against worn coats. You keep your eyes on your hands. Silence becomes not just polite, but literate, able to communicate warning, grief, permission, all with a glance. You become fluent in it. At night, the city is a metronome of boots. You lie awake and try to count them, as if arithmetic could measure fate. Somewhere a radio coughs and clears. Someone risks the BBC through static English consonants cutting like new keys. The voice speaks of France not alone, and hope pricks the skin like a cold needle. Maybe it is propaganda that fits you better. Maybe it is a lifeline. Either way, you lean toward the sound because leaning is the only movement left that feels like choosing. The first curfew notices appear as if they were inevitable and only waiting for the glue to warm. Bold print on white paper remain indoors between these hours, shades tight, compliance required. At first, The hours look almost generous, as if mercy could be set with a regulator's thumb. Yet you feel your rib cage tighten reading them. Paris, the city that flirted with dawn, will now shut its eyes on command. Somewhere a boy jokes that even time must carry papers. Parents do not laugh. You learn how quickly a city learns, how easily hands sew blankets into blackout curtains, how swiftly voices learn to fall a notch, how efficiently a street can forget how it sounded a week ago. A soldier taps on a neighbor's door to caution about a slit of light and leaves the warning behind like a splinter. You tug your own cloth tighter across the window pane as if light were a traitor eager to inform on you. And you notice the new arithmetic of presence. Buildings acquire chalk numbers, streets acquire checkpoints, cafés acquire pauses, bread acquires weight it did not have yesterday. Even your body keeps count how long a glance can be before it is noticed, how much your mouth can say before it is remembered. The city is still itself, bridges arched like brows, trees in plane tree lines, but it is also something else, a beautiful instrument retuned until familiar songs sound foreign. Rumors continue their work where laws end. You hear that Berlin will be grander, that Paris will remain untouched as a mirror to admire oneself in, that no one wants to damage a souvenir. You hear that the demarcation line down south snakes like a bored pencil, stranding lovers on opposite sides of a bureaucracy. You hear that trains run on time for some and not for others. You understand that truth is not the coin of the realm here. Paperwork is. When you finally drift, it is not sleep but submission, the kind a body does to keep itself. Outside, boots keep time. Inside, your thoughts clatter like cutlery in a drawer. Tomorrow, the rules will multiply. Tomorrow, the lines will thicken. Tomorrow, you will practice the new gesture of lowering your eyes without losing your sight. Tonight, you ask the question in the dark that no one answers aloud. How long will this last, and what will it ask of us while it does? Curfew is not a siren so much as a habit that puts on boots. Before the light has entirely gone, shutters drop with a soft, collective sigh. A last cigarette hisses out. Door chains speak in small metallic clicks. On walls, the paper notices bloom white and officious hours, penalties, the comfortless promise that rules are for everyone. At first, it is 11 to 5 and feels like an inconvenience wrapped as mercy. Then the clock tightens, minute by unnoticed minute, until night belongs almost entirely to the occupier, and the city folds itself in smaller and smaller shapes to fit inside it. Blackout becomes a verb. You learn to black out a window with stitched blankets, to black out a keyhole with a scrap of felt, to black out the thin seam where a blind does not meet a frame. An inspector raps on the door across the street and points with 2 fingers to the sliver of light like a fault line. The family's apologies come out tripping over one another. A neighbor pins an extra scarf along the sill. Another rubs a candle stub with soot, so its flame shows less. In this new night, you walk by touch, counting paving stones, tracing railings with your knuckles, and you discover how loudly your shoes speak when the lamps do not. The new time rearranges your bones. German time slips the city an hour forward, as if Paris were a picture tilted slightly askew. Breakfast arrives in the wrong light. Noon is a rumor the sun cannot confirm. Your appetite never quite meets your plate. The metro screeches on a schedule that insists you are late even when you have left early. People say the earth has not moved, only the hands of the clock, and yet every conversation begins with recalculation. At 5 by them, you murmur, and everyone nods, understanding the plural in the pronoun. Then there is paper, the true army that occupies. The ration card arrives from the mairie with the dull authority of a season change, a gray booklet stamped and numbered, squares and columns for bread, sugar, meat, fat, milk, soap. Everyone learns their category: child, worker, old, pregnant, invalid letters and numbers that pretend to be fairness but feel like verdicts. Tickets become a second currency, more valuable than coins whose faces have lost power. You tuck the booklet into an inside pocket as carefully as a photograph of someone you love. The queue becomes your other address. You stand outside the bakery before dawn, breath threading into the cold, counting the shoulders in front of you the way you once counted blessings. There are conversations that cannot start anywhere else, whispers about whose aunt saw a convoy, whose cousin sent a parcel from the country, whose landlord has a cousin in the prefecture, and what that might be worth. You learn to read a shop door the way you once read a poem, a chalk mark that hints at flour, the angle of a shutter suggesting deliveries, the owner's face telling you whether to wait or wander on. When the door finally opens, the smell that comes out is not quite bread, but history remixed coarser, darker, potato and barley as stretching the wheat until it complains. Your first loaf under occupation fits the palm's memory and disappoints the mouth. The crust is brittle, the crumb a tight, reluctant a sponge. Pain national, someone jokes, but quietly, because taste has become political. You carry it home like a reliquary. A child watches you cross the courtyard and licks his lips automatically, a gesture borrowed from days when licking meant a sweetness. You slice with care that borders on ritual, thin, thinner, thinnest, as if the knife could multiply time. Butter, when it appears, is rumor turned to yellow breath for a single meal. The spoon scrapes the dish so lightly it could be prayer. Coffee is now chicory with the memory of a harbor at the edge of it. Your tongue cannot be fooled, but your hands still want a warm cup. Soap has its own liturgy. You shave slivers and hide them from yourself, as if you do not trust your future hunger to spare them. Fat becomes a chemistry problem, saved, filtered, reused until the pan smells like last month. Milk is a queue within the queue, a dawn line inside the dawn line, and mothers barter advice outside the dairy with the seriousness of generals this farm, that day. The rumor of a can that will be wheeled in after closing if you stand where the clerk can see you. There is official help and official indifference braided so tightly you can no longer pull them apart. A new office with a new sign opens on a side street to handle ravitaillement, provisioning its counters as stacked with forms that promise to transform need into ledger entries. Clerks explain calmly that distribution depends on deliveries, that deliveries depend on quotas, that quotas depend on factors beyond anyone's control. Behind them, a poster smiles a family of 4 into satiety. You stare hard enough to burn a hole through the paper. On the street, bicycles take over the work of vanished petrol. Tires are patched into a second life and then a third. Some wheels clack with wooden inserts. You hear the strange applause of their passing on cobbles. A messenger in a flat cap bikes uphill as if towing the day itself. In his satchel, the city's circulatory system pulses notes, receipts, small salvations. Buses wheeze if they come at all. People walk. Distance regains meaning like a word you had forgotten and suddenly remember how to spell. You begin to see the ration book as not just food, but calendar. Squares cut out, week upon week, feel like days peeled from a wall. When a clerk stamps your card, you feel time declining in the ink. You tack it above your table with a pin because hiding it would feel like denying reality, and because looking at it is also a vow today. You will make it a stretch, and tomorrow too. When a square tears along the wrong line, you feel a twinge as if you had cut yourself. The paper's edges learn your fingertips. In line, philosophy thins to fit into sentences. Better this than bombs, says a woman in a hat whose netting has been mended with thread. She watches her own mouth as if the words might betray her. Better bread than pride, answers a man who sounds like he is arguing with his father's ghost. Someone mutters that the Germans eat from French fields and we gnaw on ration cards. And then everyone is quiet, not because they disagree, but because the sentence has no useful reply. You come to understand that survival tolerates only certain kinds of eloquence. The black market steps neatly into the space between promise and plate. You do not see it until you need it, and then you see it everywhere without ever finding the door directly. A woman in the queue knows a basement where butter sweats in the dark. A tailor knows a cousin who knows a farmer who will exchange eggs for a pair of shoes that no longer fit. Money becomes a rumor. Barter takes its old throne. In private, you dislike it, the way it fattens on hunger. In public, you arrange a trade for a handful of onions and call it luck. Judgments sharpen in the silence of a stairwells and soften in the steam of a pot that smells almost like the stew. People adjust themselves as if tailoring their days. You watch a seamstress fit a hem to scarcity. A dress made of two old garments seems like quiet declarations. Il faut se débrouiller. We must manage becomes a refrain. Système dit, ingenuity turned into grammar. Curtains become coats, and coats become blankets, and blankets become curtains again. You catch perfume sometimes in a doorway and cannot decide whether it is defiance or memory or both. The Germans' rules arrive as steadily as whether no lights, no bikes after this hour here, no radios turn to that voice, no this, no that. And yet, the rules are not the whole story. Beneath them, the city invents detours. A radio wrapped in a cushion whispers news that may be true. A baker saves a crust for the old woman who can stand no more. A grocer turns his head for a heartbeat so a mother can swipe a bruise of fruit that will be medicine tonight. None of this cancels the rule. All of it writes an annotation in the margin. You would not have believed how quickly you could recalibrate desire. Once, a cafe table asked for wine and conversation. Now, a chair near a stove asks for nothing. And still, you think yourself lucky. Once, a croissant was a morning. Now, a warm glass of milk could be a holiday. The city shrinks inward without losing itself. It is smaller, yes, measured in steps and cups, in stamps and slices, but the smallness acquires weight, like a pocket stone you touch for courage. One evening, you pause at the window and look down at the blackout street. The sky is a deep bruise, the buildings huddle, The curfew's silence is almost dignified, as if Paris has decided to pretend it chose restraint. You spread your last spoon of jam thin enough to see the bread through it and take a bite as carefully as if taste could escape if startled. It is sweet, and then it is gone, and still you let the sweetness argue with the day. Tomorrow there will be another cue, another stamp, another calculation carried out over a pot of water coaxed into broth. Tomorrow you will cut a slice and then cut it in half and then in half again and call that prudence rather than hunger. Tomorrow you will black out the little hole in the curtain where the pin left its mark. The city is shrinking to fit its limits. You are learning how to live inside the smaller shape without becoming a small yourself. Hunger arrives like weather you can forecast by smell. Before dawn, the air along your street carries a faint, damp aroma of flour and steam, and bodies drift toward it, as if noses were compasses. The queue outside the boulangerie curls along the wall, each person an isotherm on a map of want. You stand with hands tucked into sleeves, breath lifting in pale puffs, ration card softening at the corners from so much handling. When the door opens, the little bell sounds like mercy cut thin. The loaves that appear are darker than memory, war bread, the old men call it, with a half-pleased, half-bitter shrug that reaches back to 1917, when bread cards were first printed and patients first learned in slices. The crust is rigid, the crumb dense and damp with potato and barley. A woman accepts hers with both palms like a sacrament. A boy clutches a half loaf to his chest as if it might take flight. You practice the new arithmetic of knives, half today, half tomorrow, a sliver saved for a late-night truce with the stomach. Milk, when it comes, is a dawn chorus of hope that usually fails to clear its throat. Mothers line before the dairy with tin cans, their faces turned toward the corner where the cart should appear. When it does, the cheer is a small and embarrassed joy cannot be loud any more but real. Children shift on their feet to keep warm, imagining white mustaches and warm bellies. What is poured is often thin, a chalky ghost of milk, but it is something that coats cups and quiets sobbing. You watch as a mother dips her finger into a lid and lets her child taste. The child smiles with the relieved eyes of the very old. Sugar falls from daily life like autumn leaves, slowly at first and then all at once. Substitute sweet appears. Where real sweet used to live, beet syrup boiled to a guarded shine, jam that tastes more of memory than fruit, brittle caramels made from browned flour, and a gesture toward molasses. People trade recipes in the queue the way they once traded gossip. You push notes into your pocket carrot marmalade with lemon peel saved from long ago, chocolate that is cocoa, chicory, and courage. When you make it at home, it is not chocolate, but it is something to place on a plate and call dessert. And sometimes the name matters more than the taste. Coffee becomes a story and ritual rather than drink. You learn to draw chicory stronger, to stir in burnt sugar crumbs for a color that pretends, to hold the cup with both hands so your body believes you are being fortified. In the cafe, the waiter sets down cups that smell like a field pretending to be a port city. Around you, people lift them anyway, and the clink of porcelain returns the room to itself for a heartbeat. Someone sighs, almost, and smiles without bitterness, almost has become its own kind of blessing. At the market, the vegetables you never celebrated become centerpieces. Rutabagas with their waxed, bruised crowns. Turnips whose greens become dinner entirely on their own. Onions to sweeten water into soup that remembers, very faintly, how to be a stew. You become an expert on a skin and heft, which cabbage will last longest on a sill, which carrots are more honest than their color suggests. A fishmonger spreads trimmings on paper as if laying out jewelry heads, bones, skins, and the queue bids for broth. You carry home 2 spines and a promise of flavor and make a pot that smells like the sea hid in your kitchen. Children adapt first. They collect acorns and pretend they are beans. They shell chestnuts with brisk seriousness. They learn that a prize can be a crust hot from the oven's sideboard. You see a girl peel a turnip into ribbons, then pin 2 to her hair as if a scarcity were not a wall but a stage. Her mother lets her, saying nothing, pride and sorrow quarreling behind her eyes. In the courtyards, children trade treasures that would have meant nothing before an orange peel, dried and saved, a single square of chocolate from a cousin's parcel, an eggshell rinsed, its imagined omelette enough to tell a stories about. The black market drifts through conversations like smoke, fragrant and irritating, impossible to grasp. A neighbor whispers about butter that tastes like butter on a street with no sign. Another swears there is a farmer's cousin who will meet in the shadow of a rail bridge with a sack of potatoes if you bring old linen and do not stare. You hate the way it fattens on desperation. You need what it offers. When at last a soft-wrapped bundle of butter sits on your table, you spread it so thin that the bread gleams through. Then lick the knife clean with the kind of privacy reserved for prayer. The taste is indecently good. You feel both gratitude and shame. Then you remember that survival has always had its own etiquette. Meals become exercises in imagination. You slice bread thinner than you thought a blade could go, holding the loaf and bread together as if both might crumble. Turnip greens are sautéed until the pan sighs and salted as if the crystal were a holiday. Potatoes are grated and pressed into cakes that crisp at the edges and pretend to be indulgence. Soup becomes ceremony onion browned until the kitchen smells like Sunday. Water added in stages. A handful of barley thrown in like luck. A leftover bone lowered with reverence. You sit and blow on a spoon and, for the span of 3 mouthfuls, your body drops its argument with the world. Even abstinence learns manners. In the evenings you declare supper to be tea chicory and a heel of bread. Eaten slowly in silence, you chew each bite as if it might explain something. Your neighbor picks up her violin for 15 minutes each night. Music, she says, is a calorie that feeds the part of you that insists on standing up in the morning. Another neighbor has started a notebook of substitution soap from collected fat, ink stretched with water, polish made from oil and ash. He calls it his livre de recettes pour les jours maigres and copies pages for anyone who asks. The old rituals shrink to survive. Sunday lunches are no longer roasts that bind the room with smell, but they are still Sunday napkins folded like small flags of refusal. The best plates brought out and washed carefully afterward, as if honoring the memory of gravy. Birthdays are dates plus a candle. One child blows out a match while everyone claps anyway. Couples go walking at the hour when the light makes even ration bread look like something a painter would include in a still life. Love letters become brisk and inventive about food. I would give you my butter ration, one line reads, and you feel your throat thicken because there is no larger declaration left to make. Some days, the city seems made of queues, one for bread, another for coal or the rumor of coal, a third at the mairie for a card that will allow a fourth queue elsewhere. You wait and wait until waiting becomes your posture. You learn the ethics of place holding and the hierarchy of courtesy. You learn to read the temperature of a queue by the way people speak, how jokes lift or fail, how pity is offered behind a hand so dignity doesn't split. Waiting ceases to be empty. It is now social work, information exchange, whispered weather report, and moral rehearsal for the moment when you will be the person with a little extra and the choice of what to do with it. Warnings dress as advice. Do not say hungry too loudly near uniforms. Do not complain about rationing in a room with strangers. Do not mention a cousin's farm unless you mean to share. This is less fear than etiquette, new rules grown from old courtesies. A woman in line scolds a man for saying starving. We are hungry, she says, and alive. Her voice is stern, kind, and final. The correction lands like a blanket on shoulders. You begin to understand that thrift is not the same as meagerness. Thrift is attention shaped into kindness. You see it when a baker slips an end crust into an old man's bag without looking up. When a grocer turns his head just long enough for a handful of onion skins to be taken for a stock. When a boy half your age gives his last sweet to a crying child, then looks surprised to be hugged by 3 strangers at once. Meagerness is something else, the refusal to see anyone's hunger but your own. In all this, the city keeps its poise. Trees still rustle. The river still pulls rumors westward. Bells still measure days. The new calendar, the one made of paper squares and stamps, sits beside the old one of light, voices, and footsteps. Scarcity shapes behavior, but not soul. You catch yourself humming while slicing onions, and the tune is something from before, and for a moment your hands move the way they used to move, and the knife's rhythm is a kind of hope. Night falls earlier because you are tired earlier. You eat slowly and speak softly and wash plates with the care you reserve for fragile things. Before bed, you cut tomorrow's bread allowance and put it on a saucer as if that might prevent your midnight self from bargaining. You black out the last thread of window light and, when the room goes completely dark, sit with it for a second longer than necessary, letting the silence fill you like water poured to the brim. Somewhere below, a bicycle rattles past on wooden rims. Somewhere above, a neighbor coughs and then stops. You lie down, and hunger lies beside you like a cat present, patient, purring faintly. You do not love it, but you have learned its weight. In the morning, the weather will be the same. You will put your ration card in your pocket and tie your scarf and go out to read a day's isobars in the length of the line. You will bring home what you can and make it into something larger than itself. And you will sit to eat and let taste be small and gratitude be large, because both are muscles and both keep you standing in a city that refuses, even now, to forget its manners. You wake one morning to a city that has been papered while it slept, where yesterday there were damp stones and old theater bills. Today, the walls are bright with hard colors, red like warning, black like verdict, white like the space where argument has been erased. The glue smells sour in the early heat. Men with paste buckets and long brushes have worked the night as if repainting the city's face. A smiling family leans toward an impossible table. The bread, round and golden, the wine, dark and promising. A German soldier stands like a pillar between light and some sketched abyss, his shadow thrown over Paris as if protection could be drawn in ink. On another sheet, a caricature leers features exaggerated into hatred, bold enough to read from across a square. You do not need the words to understand the message. The lines shout. There is a cruelty to abundance when you are hungry. You step closer to the poster with the shining loaf and see the tiny lines of its typography, the care in the highlights painted on the crust. It is meant to persuade you with the simplest grammar bread exists. But you have stood 3 hours in a line for a dark, damp effort that collapsed beneath the knife. You laugh once, softly, because the picture knows nothing about your mouth. Someone beside you mutters, "Paper has a full belly?" You do not turn to see who said it. The best comments now are unsourced. They have put posters everywhere because everywhere is where you live now. Lampposts wear them like uniforms. Bus shelters carry them where buses no longer come. Kiosks are colored in slogans. Even church notice boards have been conscripted sermons pushed aside for announcements that claim to be moral. Obey, trust, work. The verbs are close enough to commandments to borrow their gravity. The punishment for tearing a poster down is a paragraph long, and no one needs to read it to believe it. You imagine the papermen afficheurs moving in teams, each sheet smoothed with 2 strokes of a brush, a whole street transformed before the glue dries. Children notice first because childhood is a study in noticing. A little boy in a cap stands on his toes and points at the soldier's chin strap, asking his mother if this man is a hero, like in the stories. His mother says, "They are drawings." She says it firmly, as if the word drawing could reduce the soldier to a harmless outline. The boy frowns and watches a long time. Pictures are arguments a child cannot refute with logic. Later, you see the same boy walk past again, his fist clenched around a stub of pencil. At a corner where posters overlap, someone has drawn a small V. It is almost too faint to see. You look away as if to save it from being noticed by your eyes. The newspapers adopt the same register as the walls. Pages are thinner now, headlines heavier, and each column is disciplined into certainty. Victories are tidy and frequent. Defeats, if mentioned at all, are geography lessons about places far enough away to be dreamt rather than believed. You take a paper in a cafe and read every line with a scholar's patience and a waiter's skepticism. The words march order, stability, New Europe. It feels like swallowing dust. You fold the page along its crease and put it back where someone else can pretend not to be reading what everyone is reading. Censorship works most swiftly on the familiar. A poster pasted where a cinema schedule used to be tells you what you will see before you see it. Comedies, where laughter is tidy and ends before curfew, romances that do not mention borders or trains or lines that divide your life. At the theater door, the lobby cards show faces as polished as tableware. Inside, the newsreel begins. marching, always the marching, and flags and cheering. The applause that follows is polite in the way a handshake is polite. It is not agreement, it is procedure. You clap 2 or 3 times so you are neither the first to stop nor the last. This is the new etiquette of the dark. Propaganda's palette is not a subtle. Reds loud as a siren's, blacks that a swallow thought. Even the fonts bark. You learn to walk with your gaze unfixed, to let messages pass across your vision like weather. It is not that you refuse to see, it is that you ration what sight can do to you. A blank face becomes your passport, not sullen, not eager, merely smooth enough to reflect nothing back to the men who look for reaction, like policemen look for papers. This too is practice. Your muscles learn it until you need no mirror to check. At night, the walls argue with themselves. After curfew, a sound like fingernails on cardboard escapes through the dark. In the morning, slogans have been altered by tiny sabotage. 2 words added to a line turn boast to insult. A face acquires a mustache that means more than hair. The Lorraine cross appears and appears again, chalky and fragile, a blessing you pass without touching. It will be scrubbed away by noon, but a faint halo of white dust clings to the stone like the memory of a sign. There are posters that do not try to charm, lists of names printed in black, shot for terror, with photographs, sometimes young faces, already receding into the flatness of reproduction. You stand and read them because the standing is a form of respect, and you read every letter as if that could reverse ink. People gather and then peel away in silence. The wall takes on the chill of a stone you do not sit on. The message is simple and effective. It is dangerous to act, and yet the act of reading becomes defiance. You can measure only by the speed at which your heart argues with your ribs. Sometimes the walls are honest by accident. A French government notice about rationing is posted over a poster of overflowing tables, and the tear, where the glue pulled wrong, leaves a ragged crescent cornucopia wounded by paper knife. You show it to a neighbor, and she smiles the way you smile at a child who has told a difficult truth without knowing. You begin to look for these accidents, misalignments, where narrative breaks, a seam where 2 stories fail to cohere. They are small, but you're learning to live on small truths. The radio, too, is recruited. Official stations speak in measured tones that ask to be obeyed. Their announcers steady the way a metronome is steady. You listen because not listening is its own confession. Then, late. A room goes darker still. A cushion wraps the wireless, and a hand turns a dial past legality toward a voice that jokes in code with those who can hear it. The wall poster in your stairwell warns that listening to foreign broadcasts is a crime. The paper has more authority than the pasted glue, but less than the static that clears into words not alone, not forever. You turn the volume down and pass the message into the kitchen like contraband fire. Cinema does more than repeat. It distracts. And distraction is a kind of mercy you pay for with attention. Halfway through a German comedy dubbed so carefully you can forget the original. Someone laughs, really laughs, and then puts a hand to her mouth as if she has spoken out of turn. A soldier 3 rows ahead shifts, and the row shifts with him. You wonder, sitting there, whether the purpose of the film is to persuade or simply to quiet the body for 90 minutes so the day can be survived more easily. You dislike the thought and cannot dismiss it. You're grateful for the warmth and the dark all the same. Propaganda that attacks rather than promises leaves a residue the city will be a long time washing away. Those cruel drawings that make neighbors into monsters do not vanish when they are scraped from walls. They cling behind eyelids. A tailor, pauses before one and shakes his head, his voice low, his anger higher than his whisper can hold. Paper teaches even when we think we are not learning, he says. You file it beside the other sentences you keep now like salt. By midday, the poster men return, carrying fresh stacks, covering what last night's chalk dared. Their brushes slap, slap, slap a sound like small waves. Layers grow until the wall becomes a sediment, history pressed wetly into itself. You imagine that when the occupation ends and you allow yourself the grammar of when the first wind will pick at the edges and the city will molt. Underneath, older colors will blink in the light like eyes reopened. The city answers in its own dialect. Shop windows leave small spaces between objects that imply a scarcity without admitting it. Cafe chalkboards practice understatement soup. Theaters sell comedies without stating whose. On certain corners, people gather not in front of the newest poster, but beneath the oldest statue, as if to remind themselves that the stone precedes paper. You begin to choose your routes not by distance, but by which walls feel least hungry for your mind. One afternoon, a sudden shower lifts a corner of propaganda along a boulevard and peels it back like a bandage. Underneath, an old advertisement for a concert blooms in damp color names of musicians, a date that belongs to another calendar. People stop and stare as if someone had opened a window into breathable air. A municipal worker hurries to smooth the newer poster down again. He swipes and presses, and the old music disappears, but not quite. You walk on humming, and you're not the only one. At home, the stairwell has its own ecology of paper. Notices about ration categories, about curfews, about the penalty for listening to enemy radio share a cork board with a lost cat drawing in a child's hand, and a sign-up for wood deliveries that never come when promised. You pin a torn page of a poem between two official sheets. No one removes it. You pass it daily without reading and feel it working on you anyway. The way a good smell works on hunger not filling, but strengthening. In time, you stop asking whether the posters work. Power rarely needs persuasion. It asks only for quiet. The paper is less a lesson than a pressure, a constant hand on the back of your neck reminding you to keep your head at a polite angle. Your answer is not eloquent. It is the blank face, the turned shoulder, the glance that slides off ink the way rain slides off oiled cloth. At night, your answer is chalk and whisper. In the morning, it is the choice to look not at the loaf on the wall, but at the loaf in your hands, however small, however dark, and to share a slice of it with a neighbor because that is a poster the city can read without glue. Tomorrow the men will paste again. Tomorrow the walls will wake with fresh orders and brighter promises and fuller tables. Tomorrow the paper will keep speaking, but tonight moonlight snags on a torn edge where someone's hurried V has left a roughness the scraper missed. You run a fingertip along the wall and come away with the faintest chalk dust, white as a breath on a cold morning. You rub it into your palm and carry it home like a secret nobody has to tell you to keep. The cafe door complains on its hinges when you push it. A sound so familiar you feel your shoulders drop before you cross the threshold. Inside, the air is warm with bodies and the faint, earthy ghost of chicory. Marble tables still shine in a tired way. Bentwood chairs still creak. Mirrors along the wall still double the room like an old magician's trick. A waiter in a white jacket ties his towel at the usual angle and asks, with a voice that has given up on surprise, "Café." You nod. The cup that arrives is small and dark and smells like a field trying to remember the sea. You hold it in both hands because warmth is a kind of truth the censors cannot edit. Menus have been trimmed until they resemble telegrams. Soup or no soup, chicory or hot water. If there is a tart today, there isn't tomorrow. The waiter shrugs in apology without moving his face. He balances 3 cups on a tray that would once have held a bottle and glasses and a decision you didn't need to justify. At the next table, a man tears his bread into thimble-sized pieces and dips each into the cup, softening the crust to persuade his teeth the world is kinder than it is. You sit with your back to the wall because old customs outlive new orders. From here, you can see the room's conversations like weather-small fronts that pass, pockets of high pressure when voices rise and then, as if remembering, fall. Germans sit at 2 tables by the window, their rifles propped like umbrellas against the banquette. Their laughter lands with the clink of china. Too bright for this dim day? When glassware meets wood too loudly, the room flinches and then pretends it has merely shifted in its chair. The cafe has become several things at once: a refuge for habits, a stage for proximity, a trap for the careless sentence. A woman in a well-cut suit sits alone with a compact open like a shield. Her lipstick is precise, a thin blade of color drawn with the authority of practice. When one of the soldiers leans to ask, in careful French, if the seat is taken, she smiles as if she has rehearsed this scene and the next ones. There's a hush, not unkind, that encircles her like an aura. The word collaboratrice travels in the room the way a draft does sensed on the neck before it is acknowledged. You feel judgment rise in you like heat. Then you see how her hand shakes when she closes the compact, and your judgment confuses itself with pity. Survival does not always announce its terms at the beginning of the contract. Near the mirror, 2 students have spread notebooks as if they are maps. One sketches the corner of the room, the curve of a chair, the shape of a man's hat, while the other pretends to read the paper and instead whispers lines of a poem that avoids the words it means. Their heads incline and separate again like birds pecking at seeds. A gendarme steps in, and both pages slide closed as if the air had extinguished a flame. When the officer orders a coffee and stares too long at nothing, the boys reopen their notebooks, now writing grocery lists that include metaphors for flour. The owner stands near the zinc counter with the expression of a custodian of weather. He smiles at German guests with a practiced symmetry and says, "Bitte," so cleanly you could cut cloth with it. 10 minutes later, he will look away while a folded scrap changes hands under a saucer. A letter with no address moving from a woman in a wool coat to a man whose shoes have recently been polished with lard. The owner sees everything, and his ledger is not the one in the drawer. It is a list kept in muscle and breath. Notes travel here as if the tables were train stations. A waiter brushes crumbs into his palm and with the same motion leaves a rectangle of paper beneath a saucer. A patron lifts the cup and traps the paper with his thumb as if checking for heat. No one watches, everyone sees. You learn that the choreography of defiance is the same as the choreography of a service, small, practiced gestures that keep a room orderly. Later, when someone asks whether cafés were resistance hubs, the memory you will have is not of speeches, but of plates placed gently, cups angled just so, and something folded disappearing as neatly as a breath. Outside, bicycles clatter on wooden rims. Inside, a violin scrapes 3 notes from a wireless that is not supposed to be on. The barman coughs and turns the volume down. You catch the BBC for a moment, a consonant you could cut your finger on, then the sound collapses into a friendly static. Conversations resume their careful rhythms. At your elbow, a man in a brown jacket tells a story about a cousin who caught a carp with his bare hands. The table laughs softly because it must practice the mechanics of laughter to keep them from rusting. At the door, a German corporal with a face like someone's neighbor's son hesitates, removes his cap, and says, "Pardon," to an old woman whose cane occupies the aisle. She nods as if he had passed her a salt cellar. He blushes. He is 20 and far from home and told that Paris is a prize. He orders sausage and bread and receives sausage. Improbably, your mouth fills with the kind of anger that tastes of iron. He eats. You watch your own cup cool. The old woman counts stitches in her knitting and misses one because the needle shakes. Normalcy is a kind of defiance here. 2 friends argue about football as if there were fixtures to argue about. And the argument itself is a shelter you can step under when the sky starts to spit. A pair of lovers shares a spoon with a seriousness that would have embarrassed them last year. In the corner, a dark-haired woman reads a novel with a paper cover to hide its band name. Her lips move as she reads, and the waiter refills her cup as if it were tea at a wake. You realize that the act of sitting is political. To occupy a chair without permission from fear is an occupation of a different kind. Left bank legends survive in quieter registers. At a table by the draft, you sometimes see a young philosopher whose coat fits as badly as his conscience, scribbling notes about freedom that taste different now than they did in lecture halls. Across from him, a woman with a pointed gaze and a better coat edits a page without apology. They talk when the cafe thins and fall silent when it swells. If they are not the names you will one day read in books, they are their understudies, people for whom the cafe is not only warmth but punctuation, a place to put a comma in a thought that could get you arrested if you mispronounce it. There is a ritual to paying. The Germans stack marks like silver towers. The waiter collects them as if they were merely discs that take up space, and slides a few francs in change toward a French couple whose coins do not match the bill. When the soldiers stand to leave, their boots strike the floorboards like metronomes returning to tempo. The room inhales, holds, and then releases the breath in a small communal exhale that would be a cheer if anyone were ready to be brave in public. Nobody is. Not today. Perhaps later. Outside, the light has shifted. The boulevard carries bicycles like ants carrying leaves. Shop windows hold their breath. Inside, The owner polishes a glass that does not need polishing. He's counting, not money, but minutes until curfew, and the number of chairs is still filled, and the number of cups he can stretch from his supplies. When a child presses her nose to the glass, he winks and draws a smiley face in the esteem with one finger, then wipes it away at once, ashamed of the tenderness. There are dangers that do not wear uniforms. Voices rise about a woman seen last night in a car with an officer, and the tale grows meat with each retelling. Her name, real or invented, finds itself dressed in adjectives bold, cheap, starving, practical. In the corner, another woman sits alone and eats her soup with the posture of a saint. You think about hunger's grammar, how it conjugates in different persons. I am hungry, you are compromised, they are collaborators. You lower your eyes and find your spoon again. When the day thins, the cafe empties into curfew, like water pouring into a familiar mold. The waiter wipes the table with the same care he gave the note, as if cleanliness and courage were branches on the same tree. The owner locks the till and then, after the door is bolted and the lamps are snuffed, unlocks the side door to a knock that repeats 3 quick, 1 long. Tonight, someone will pass through the room quietly with a parcel that looks like bread and isn't. Tomorrow, the room will be the room again, cups and soup and laughter held on a leash. You step back onto the street with the taste of almost coffee in your mouth. The cafe has steadied you the way a hand steadies a shoulder. It did not feed you. Not really. Not enough for your stomach to bother to thank you. But it fed the part that insists your chair is yours until you rise from it. Boots thud somewhere 2 streets over. The sky lowers its dark hat. You walk home with the slow pace of someone who knows every paving stone and can name each by touch. Behind you, the cafe door breathes and settles, and the cups cool, and on a small saucer drying by the sink, a circle of chicory marks the place where normal life insisted on itself. You drift along Boulevard Haussmann because walking is still free, and Paris still arranges its windows like sentences you can read without buying. Scarcity has narrowed silhouettes and sharpened eyes. Everywhere you look, the city edits itself with needle and thread. Wool has marched off in uniforms. Cotton has thinned to the whisper of gauze. Silk has been requisitioned into parachutes and rumors, and yet a woman passes you in a coat compiled from 2 older garments, seams showing the way tree rings show years. She holds herself at full height, and the seam becomes an ornament, not an apology. Shoes knock the truth out of the pavement. Leather is a story everyone remembers, but few can tell now. Wooden soles clatter a whole orchestra of clogs and platforms. Straps cut from canvas and old belts. Heels hammered together by men who used to repair luggage and now repair dignity. Children laugh at the echo of their own footsteps, calling it the sound of soldiers, and their parents hush them because even jokes wear ration cards. Blisters form and then harden into calluses, proof that the body can learn a new city the way hands learn a new tool. Stockings go scarce first, then theoretical, then imaginary. Paris invents a seam with pencil, charcoal, eyeliner rubbed from the heel of a burnt match. A careful line drawn up the back of a bare leg is both fashion and the sleight of hand. A declaration that elegance is an act that does not require permission. You watch a girl inspect her line in a dark shop window and adjust it with the concentration of a surgeon. The illusion isn't perfect, which is exactly why it works. It reads as human, not propaganda. Window mannequins perform their own rationing. Collars detach to become a second garment. Sleeves unbutton to be cuffs. Lapels flip so a jacket can pretend to be new. Magazines thinner each month. Their colors a little milked, still arrive with patterns that promise miracles from a scraps. Use the old lining for a child's collar. Dye last year's dress in walnut to disguise the wear. Pages get passed down stairs like contraband and return with pinholes and sugar stains from being traced. In line, women compare notes the way officers compare maps. This hem saves a meter. This pleat drinks fabric you cannot spare. This bias cut is too hungry. Better leave it to fantasies. Perfume holds its ground as if guarding a border. Bottles are rationed to memory-warmed drops. Scarves carry yesterday's dab like a message. You catch a whisper of jasmine on a stair where the official notices warn against listening to foreign radios, and the fragrance reads as a rebuttal written in air. Rouge becomes beet juice on a cheek. Hair sets with sugar water when lacquer disappears. Cold cream is rationed the way an apology is rationed, used only when necessary. A seamstress shows you a scarf dyed from onion skins. The color, a civilized amber. You praise it as if she has painted her own dawn. Men wear thrift like discipline. Jackets are turned inside out and relined. Elbows learn leather patches or neat squares cut from hidden places. Cuffs are let down until the ghost of the old hem glows faintly like a memory. Hats come back into fashion as roofs for frayed crowns. A clerk pins a new crease into trousers. With a needle he keeps in his ledger's spine, and the gesture looks like prayer. Tailors advertise invisible mending and mean-it. They pull a thread from a trouser's hem and weave it into the torn lapel with the patience of monks repairing a manuscript. There are coupons for cloth, now cards as precise as ration books, stamped with numbers that claim to be logic. A bolt of decent flannel becomes a rumor before it becomes a garment. Fabric shops keep smaller hours and larger queues. Clerks smile the way doctors smile when prescriptions depend on supply. Dye houses thrive. Everything passes through a bath of walnut. Coffee, cochineal, beats colors born from kitchen and field. A dress that used to be summer blue returns as sober brown. It stands straighter in the mirror. Less flirtation than vow. Atelier's work with what remains. A head seamstress, her shoulders squared like a general's, rearranges a pattern on the table to save centimeters, the way a quartermaster saves soup. A mannequin, thin from more than fashion, turns slowly while pins find new homes. Paris couture continues in a narrowed register, the way a piano still plays when a few keys stick. The music is simpler and no less deliberate. You hear stories whispered at the back doors of famous houses. A director who argued that to move fashion north would be like moving the Seine. A cutter who smuggled bolts piece by piece in hollow stools. A forewoman who kept her girls paid by inventing alterations that took longer than they needed to. Names afloat with the weight of paradox. Some remain at the Ritz, gliding across carpets that do not feel the winter, navigating dinners where butter tastes like politics. Others keep doors half open and work under rules that change with the weather shows at odd hours. Fewer looks. Linings turned into fronts. You stand outside and scan the faces that emerge, models who hold their heads as if they were balancing invisible crowns, clients stepping into staff cars that smell of cigarettes and oranges, seamstresses rushing home with hands still pricked with thread. Historians will argue about who compromised and who resisted and how anyone could tell the difference. You only know the courage it takes to stitch after curfew with your windows blacked out and your radio wrapped in a pillow. System D, do it yourself. Make do becomes a mother tongue. Women tear old sheets into bias tape and make a virtue of it. Contrast piping, cutting a clever line down a skirt. Men knit sweaters with wool unraveled from a blanket. The stitch tension reads as determination. Girls learn buttonholes alongside arithmetic. Boys darn socks, the seriousness reserved for learning to shave. Darning eggs pass hand to hand like talismans. In evenings, needles click in kitchens bright with one bulb. And the sound is the city's quiet heart, stitching itself together again and again. Even hunger dresses itself. A woman steps out of a cellar bar with lipstick drawn as carefully as a letter home. Her wooden soles loud and proud. She does not walk so much as announce her existence. A plait tied with a ribbon cut from a dress hem looks like deliberate design. A boy wears his father's jacket with the sleeves rolled twice and looks like a revolutionary in training. You see pride used as fabric cut, shaped, draped, and realize it is the one material not on any ration list. Magazines keep up their end of the bargain, even censored. They publish drawings that call scarcity by its first name and then flirt with it. Anyway, coats with removable panels, dresses that reverse from day to evening, collars that snap on and off like decisions. Utility becomes a kind of elegance pockets that hold ration books without bulging. Belts wide enough to mean security. There is flirtation, but it is with competence rather than luxury. The dowdy posture of pity is nowhere to be found on these pages. The women illustrated here look like the city would pick them to be bridges if it could. The occupiers notice what they cannot reproduce. Officers remark on the way Parisian women walk how a patched coat does not conceal a straight spine, and that observation becomes another kind of appropriation. There are shows for uniforms, soirees where couture is paraded for uniforms that do not know the price paid in coupons and calories. Not all admiration is innocent, not all disgust is useful. You learn to hold two truths without letting them fight to the death inside you. Tailors keep tiny secrets beneath seams. A lining saved from better days. A pocket cut deeper for a husband who will need a place to hide a leaflet. A hem with two lengths stitched in. One for now, one for then. You run your fingers along your own coat and feel that second line of stitches, like a promise tattooed where only cloth can read it. On Sundays, despite curfew, despite queues, the streets bloom with effort, wooden-soled shoes, yes, but polished, patched elbows, yes, but brushed. In the park, a woman unwraps a scarf dyed to the precise color of cigarette smoke and knots it at her throat with the gravest of expertise. A man in a hat frayed at the band tips it to her, and the exchange feels as formal as court. Children spinning clothes cut down and cut down again, their laughter pulling old fabric to new shapes. It is not frivolity, it is appetite for beauty, for attention paid, for being seen as a person rather than a number on a form. At night, Needles take the watch, scissors whisper, pins click into their tin like rain on a sill. Behind blackout cloth, a mother shortens a coat and spares the extra for mittens. A daughter hems her skirt with stitches, so even they could be used to measure distance. On the table, a small pile of thread ends looks like confetti, saved for a private fete. When the garment is done, the try-on becomes ceremony. The mirror reflects not wealth, but will. The fit across the shoulders is victory. The way a skirt hangs is relief. The buttons fasten like tidy decisions. You do not stare long, mirrors draw attention, and attention draws questions, but you allow yourself one breath of satisfaction. Because what you made today is not just fabric. It is a sentence you have written in a city trying to revise you. You walk to bed with the soft ache in your fingers that means you have spent more than money. Tomorrow there will be another queue at the fabric shop, another rumor about a bolt of cloth, another dye pot steaming on a back burner, another pair of wooden soles to patch. Tomorrow the city will walk again in patched pride, and uniforms will glance and register something they cannot requisition. You lie down in the dark and hear a neighbor's sewing machine purr like a cat under a blanket. The sound is gentle and stubborn. It is the thrum of a people fitting themselves to shortage without letting shortage define their shape. You learn new meanings for old words: prudence, prudery, pragmatism. They all hover under a larger, slipperier word that everyone uses and no one defines the same way: collaboration. In ration lines and stairwells, in cafés and courtyards, the city speaks about it in a register of accusation and apology, often in the same sentence. We must work with them, a neighbor says solemnly, holding up a sheaf of forms as if paper were absolution. We mustn't forget who we are, his wife replies, not looking at him. Between those two pronouns, a household rearranges its furniture. On the radio that is allowed, voices praise Marshal Pétain with a reverence borrowed from church. In apartments like yours, where a cushion wraps the forbidden dial at night, the BBC arrives with code words and a calm that tastes like cool water. In daylight, you hear Pétain called savior by a woman who lost a son in the last war and believes that yielding is a kind of shepherding. At dusk, you hear him called traitor by a boy who has learned to whisper bravely. You hold both sentences in your mouth and find that either can cut the tongue. At the Hôtel de Ville, French officials stamp papers beneath portraits of men who once argued in more public ways. The queues are as long as anywhere else, but the silence is different, a silence of calculation. You watch a clerk adjust his spectacles, and you understand that the tiny movement is a decision. This stamp now, this letter later, this delay that might mean a life diverted into another lane. Bureaucracy becomes a battlefield measured in minutes. Some insist they are keeping the gears turning so the machine does not grind people to powder. Others insist the machine exists because the gears turn. You leave the building with a document that will allow you a sack of coal and a question that allows nothing. Shops adapt in the grammar of survival. A butcher spells out sausages with such elegant chalk that the word itself seems nourishing. 2 hours later, he will sell a better cut to a German corporal who has learned how much to tip. You're not there to witness the transaction. You're there in the evening to hear the story, embroidered with anger and a little envy, and to decide how loudly to nod. On the corner, a hairdresser adds a small sign in German to the window and learns to say bitte, setzen Sie sich with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. In a neighborhood where people have to stop looking directly at one another, the mirrors in his shop do not know where to rest their gaze. Newspapers arrive thinner and more certain. Headlines are so confident they barely touch the page. They hover like orders. You sit in a cafe where we both have sat before and slide the paper open as if disarming a trap. There are victories in Russia that sound like parades and a morality that feels like a uniform. You fold the sheet carefully, leave it behind, and walk out into a street where posters tell you to trust men whose hands you have never shaken. Collaboration takes less theatrical forms. A superintendent notes which tenants continue to receive postcards from London cousins. A concierge stops sweeping when a voice down the hall rises, and the pause itself becomes a grammar no one mistakes. A woman whose husband is away learns the value of a German's ration card the way one learns the value of a new word slowly, with shame, and then fluently. Another woman refuses an officer's attention and pays for refusal with inspections that grow too frequent to be random. Judgment is fast, knowledge is slow, hunger outruns both. In the evenings, accusations tuck themselves into anecdotes like knives into napkins. He smiles too quickly at the Germans. She is always seen with packages. His brother obtained a travel pass when no one else could. The sentences fall like beads on a string and click into necklaces you will not admit to wearing. You have your private catalog of faces you will not forgive. Then you pass one of them helping an old woman up a stair with a tenderness that will not fit in any ledger, and your catalog loses a page. There are double lives that advertise themselves as steady work. The cafe owner jokes with officers at noon, pours them a brandy he pretends to resent, and at dusk leaves the back door unlatched at a pattern of knocks no one else hears. In the attic above a seamstress's shop, scraps of paper become leaflets that taste of damp and ink. Downstairs, she pins a hem for a uniformed customer and does not prick a skin. A printer keeps 2 sets of plates, legal notices in daylight, words with teeth after curfew, and goes home each night with ink on his fingers and neither plate in his pockets. When the world ends for such people, it ends quietly at a landing with 2 men in tidy coats and no reason to raise their voices. Rumors are their own currency. They inflate faster than francs. You hear of Laval smiling at the wrong time, of a meeting where the handshake lasted too long, of a list drafted in a clean hand and filed in a drawer that isn't dusted because fear prefers to sit undisturbed. He did what was necessary. One man says, necessary for whom a woman replies, both are right in the way that words are right when they sit in different rooms. There is a cruelty reserved for women that the city will pretend later not to recognize as its own invention. A woman you have watched for months, hat pin precise, gloves mended so cleverly the mend looks like flourish steps into a car in broad daylight with an officer who is careful with doors. The street looks down, someone says horizontal, and the word crawls along the curb like something too alive to crush with a heel. You think about hunger's conjugations again, and you go home and catch yourself using the word collaborator only for a woman. and you sit down hard on a chair and relearn how nouns are traps. The church tries to speak in a voice that fits into stone. One priest blesses restraint and obedience with a sincerity that makes you admire his certainty without adopting it. Another murmurs prayers that sound almost like injunctions to patience with a future tense. In a side chapel, a nun hands a mother a certificate with a name newly printed on it, and the mother weeps into the paper as if liquid could secure ink. There are confessions that have nothing to do with sin and everything to do with fear, an absolution that does not mention God's timetable at all. Informers are a species everyone claims to identify and no one admits to knowing. A man disappears from your building. The next day, a neighbor speaks too cheerfully on the stairs. It is enough to write a chapter in your heart, and you do. And it is a bad chapter, and you carry it around like a stone you cannot quite throw. Weeks later, you learn the cheerful neighbor has a son who depends on his ration and believes politeness is the only bridge left between him and the world. The stone remains. It is smaller. It still weighs something. Sometimes the city's rage wants a parade. It must settle for a story. A collaborator is dragged from a doorway in another arrondissement. The tale travels faster than trams. He had a list. Someone says, he asked for nothing. Someone else counters. Before the rumor reaches your street, the man has grown a mustache and then lost it, the better to fit the imagination of those telling his fate. Justice is an organ the city cannot play without hitting wrong notes. Vengeance knows only one melody and will sing it until it is hoarse. You shut your window and think about pitch. And still, there is kindness that never learns to pronounce itself. A gendarme looks away, while a woman slips through a cordon with a child on her hip and a lie in her mouth. A municipal clerk loses a file long enough for a cousin to be warned. A German sentinel shares a cigarette with the old man who feeds the birds at the same hour each day. Neither speaks the other's language with competence, and both manage to say, with their hands, something like weather. These gestures do not cancel anything. They simply insist that under every uniform there is a person capable, on Tuesdays, of not being monstrous. The vocabulary of compromise multiplies. To prevent worse, to keep my job so I can help others, to feed the children. In the night, you repeat these lines to yourself and try them on like coats left by strangers at a cloakroom. Some fit, others itch at the neck. You decide you will judge less loudly and discern more carefully, and then the morning brings a headline that makes you rage again with the fragile purity of the unfed. You realize, a citizen of a country within the city where certainty is rationed and humility is issued without forms. One evening, you pass a poster of Bedtime, the paternal jaw set to reassure. Beneath, someone has written in pencil a single word that borrows its power from its size. Non. You look around as if caught reading a diary. The pencil line is thin, the refusal is not. You walk on, hand in pocket, fingers feeling the soft wear of the ration book's corners. And you think not, for the first time, that collaboration is not a single act, but a weather pattern. Some days it rains on everyone. Other days the sun lands on one window only. And the rest of the street pretends not to notice the warmth. Back at home, the neighbors' voices travel through walls grown thin with listening. Someone argues for patience, someone else for pride. A child asks whether heroes eat better than other people. A kettle boils as if nothing were at stake. You set the table 2 plates, 1 cup, the bread cut equally, and call it supper. When you blow out the candle, the room becomes briefly honest in the dark. You lie awake and understand the city's moral map is not drawn in straight lines, but in switchbacks that keep you from seeing the road behind as anything other than necessity. In the morning, you will choose again, and the next morning too, and you will make your face polite in the street, and your heart unruly at the window. It is not courage and not capitulation. It is, for now, your way of not handing your dignity over with your papers. Sunday used to be church bells and polished shoes. Now it is boots clicking on the long stone ribs of the Champs-Élysées. Gray-green uniforms strolling as if the boulevard had been laid for their pleasure. The plane trees lift their leaves like applause, which feels like treachery from trees, and the light gleams on belt buckles stamped with eagles. The city has practiced its blank face and wears it well. People step aside without hurrying, look without looking, resume their conversations with a careful quiet that isn't silence so much as camouflage. The soldiers photograph everything. They pose in front of the Arc de Triomphe 2 at a time, swapping places so each can be the smiling conqueror. A corporal lines up a shot of a flower seller and pays her double, because that is the kind of generosity the victors can afford. She pockets the coins without expression, then rearranges the chrysanthemums as if tenderness were a form of hygiene. Near the Trocadero, they frame the Eiffel Tower between the V of their fingers, laughing like boys on a school outing. Somewhere in Germany, albums fill with Paris mounted on black paper, corners pasted down neat proof not only of victory but of tourism. You watch a man press his thumb against a postcard rack and think that paper can trap a monument the way a net traps a fish. The monument still moves in the water of your mind. You slip into a side street where commerce remembers how to behave. A butcher wipes his hands on his apron and practices nouns cutlet, schinken, speck. He serves slices with a politeness that might be fear or might be good business, and either way weighs heavier than meat. His French customers look away as the saber falls through a cut they will never see. It is easy to write a story about him in your head. It is harder to know if it is true. A grocer smiles at 2 privates who struggle with the word for onions. Later that evening, he gives a widow the last of the bruised ones at half price, and you do not know whether either act cancels or compounds the other. Not every encounter chooses polite. At a terrace on Saint-Germain, a patrol stacks rifles and drinks something that is not chicory. When an old man reaches the door too slowly, a young sergeant's hand shoots out and shoves him into the jam. The room freezes, time holds its breath. Then the plates clink again with exaggerated normalcy. This is a rhythm you recognize by now, sudden cruelty, followed by performance of calm, like a slap smoothed over with a fresh tablecloth. You lift your cup and taste wood and resentment, and both are familiar flavors. Children learn the shapes of uniforms without learning their meaning. 2 boys goose a step down a corridor of plane trees and salute a lamppost, then burst into giggles when their mothers swoop, warning voices flat with fear. Not here, not like that. On the Ile de la Cité, A little girl waves shyly at a young soldier holding a letter with the blue felt-post stripe. He raises a hand back, bashful, and you feel the contradiction lodge where argument cannot dislodge it. It would be easier if the enemy were perfectly drawn, all jawline and cruelty. It is not. The fraternization that the city will punish later already writes itself. Line by line, a bouquet changes hands near a metro entrance, and the woman who accepts it wears a dress altered twice, but still clever. She walks with the soldier along the river and keeps her head high because posture is armor. To some, she is hunger dressed as flirtation. To others, loneliness negotiating its own ceasefire. To most, she's an emblem to be judged from windows. The word people, do not say aloud, collaboratrice follows them like a dog that never tires. You watch her slip a slice of sausage into her handbag with a practiced motion and feel both contempt and pity rise like twin tides inside you, and you understand that feelings can be occupied too. Art puts on its makeup and goes to work for whoever buys the ticket. In a theater off Montparnasse, uniforms fill the front rows and applaud with an energy that dares the performers to falter. You take a seat high in the balcony and watch a comic play that refuses to mention time or war. The audience obliges by laughing on cue. Through your opera glasses, you see the actress's eyebrow lift a fraction during a line about house guests who will not leave, and the balcony breathes a tiny, illegal chuckle. The orchestra plays louder as if to drown complicity. When the curtain falls, the applause folds the room shut like a paper fan. Outside, soldiers light cigarettes and discuss what they liked as if choosing a necktie. In the Luxembourg, a pair of sentries read letters from home on a bench, while pigeons strut in dictatorial confidence. The men's heads bow in the same way that lovers' heads bow, and their smiles, when they come, are small and private and unbecoming to conquerors. You hate them for their presence and forgive them for their mouths. And both hates feel insufficient. A few benches over, a woman with a yellow star is turned away by a sign and pretends to examine a tree. The sentries keep their eyes on their envelopes. Again, the contradiction, a tenderness that makes no dent in the larger indifference. The city learns the locations of the occupiers' feasting rooms by ear. Place Vendôme at dusk sings with laughter behind thick glass. The Ritz throws light into the street as if expensive lamps could reverse winter. Maxims laughs at jokes no longer written in Parisian. You stand outside once and watch a driver nap in a car with the engine running and realize that some machines are allowed to idle while others are counted by the teaspoon coal. Oil, bread, breath, it feels obscene and exactly as intended. You pass the Hotel Majestic, where the Kommandantur issues orders in rooms that used to smell of luggage and hope. Messengers trot up the steps with maps. Clerks with tidy hair carry files that are not papers but levers. Inside, decisions expand to fill parquet halls about ration numbers, about labor drafts, about a family in your building you will soon not hear climbing the stairs. The soldiers you saw photographing roses will report to men who never raise their voices and move pins on a large map. This double exposure tourist and instrument makes the city's moral depth hard to measure. The shallows look deep and the deeps look navigable until you are in them. And yet humanity keeps leaking through the seams. In a bookshop on the left bank, a lieutenant asks the owner, in clumsy French, for a novel by a writer who despises all uniforms. And when the owner finds a copy, the soldier bows in a way that belongs to another war. At a corner cafe, a private hears a woman cough and slides a wrapped lozenge across a saucer without speaking. The woman takes it without gratitude because gratitude is a currency she cannot bear to spend. On a bridge at dusk, you pass two men in field gray arguing softly about whether Paris is beautiful or merely famous. One says, "I did not know stone could be so light." And you know you will remember that sentence because it is true and useless at the same time. Police whistles still cut the evening. Checkpoints bloom at intersections with the efficiency of fungus after rain. Papers are examined under the white bite of a flashlight. Faces are lifted by fingers that do not belong to them. Once the beam lingers on your photograph longer than necessary, and the soldier holding the card looks up into your real face without malice, merely thoroughness. When he returns the document, your palm is damp and you hate your body for admitting fear to anyone but you. Around the corner, a poster peels in the night. A boy pastes a small Lorraine cross over the tear and scampers into a doorway like a mouse who has stolen a cathedral. There are places the Germans seem to avoid out of superstition, or orders alleys that lead nowhere, courtyards guarded by cats, doorways that produce only laundry and cigarette smoke. There are places they colonize with gusto terraces that face the sun, brothels regulated with paperwork as if disease could be conquered with forms, soldiers' canteens where beer arrives like a letter from home. You live between these maps, stepping or not stepping, learning to feel where tread has made the ground dangerous. More than once, you catch yourself surprised by a soldier's youth, and then angry at your surprise. They are old enough to carry rifles. They are young enough to grin when a dog begs a scrap. The chasm between what their boots do to your street and what their faces do to your certainty is wide and impassable. You keep trying to bridge it with a sentence. They are men, not monsters. They are uniforms, not men. And the sentence keeps collapsing under the weight of both truths. One evening at twilight, the boulevard shimmers with heat, and a column comes through, not like a parade, but like a tide. A tank clanks, metal, complaining. A woman steps back against a doorway with her child behind her skirt. A man salutes reflexively as if the machine were a flag. The turret swings, careless as a gaze, and you feel the old, pure fear, no contradictions now, only threat. When the street settles again into bicycles and gossip, you hear laughter return in cautious drips. The city is a body constantly recovering from being startled. Back at your window, you look down at a square where boots and shoes cross in perpendicular purposes. A soldier pauses to tie his lace. A lamplighter covers a bulb. A girl in wooden heels navigates a puddle with the care of a dancer. Somewhere a gramophone scratches out a waltz. Somewhere else a shutter slams because a radio has found a voice from London. The occupiers walk among the occupied as if nothing could be more natural. The occupied arrange themselves around the occupiers as if water could learn to flow uphill. Historians will count this intimacy and argue about its depth, its danger, its banality. You do not count, you listen. The city's new soundtrack is boots. Yes, but also the stubborn small sounds that boots cannot drown cups on saucers. Bicycle bells? A child whistling a tune he is too young to know is code. You blow out your candle and let the evening breathe. Down in the street, a pair of soldiers pass, shadows stitched at their heels. One says something that makes the other laugh like a boy. At the corner, a woman turns away to hide her face from them and from you. You want the world to be simpler. The world wants to be true. Between those wants, Paris walks home. You stand before the Louvre and feel the absence before you count the guards. The facade is unchanged, the long classical calm of it. The windows that once winked with afternoon, but the air is wrong, as if the building has swallowed its own breath. The doors are bolted. The courtyard hears your footsteps and returns them more loudly than it should. You know why? Long before the boots reached Paris, trucks had rolled out from these doors at dawn, canvas flaps tied down, labels cryptic enough to be truthful. Evacuation. Inside the crates were the names the nation speaks the way a believer speaks a prayer. The curators did not wait for permission. They wrapped paintings as if tucking in children, lowered marble as if moving elders, made lists in 3 inks so nothing could be lost to a spilled bottle. They were the small conspirators against enormity. They had practiced, rehearsed routes the way firemen rehearse ladders. A portrait becomes a patient. The winged victory of Samothrace becomes a navigational problem solved by nerve and pulleys and oaths whispered under breath. Venus leaves her niche without blushing, heavy as truth. She is eased onto straw as gently as if a straw could judge. The Mona Lisa, a name so famous one need not say it goes under boards and padding, and then into a truck whose tires already know the road south. By the time the invaders set their boots on the spiral stairs, the walls are tidy negatives, pale rectangles, or frames used to throw their shadows. The emptiness is not defeat. It is a riddle the occupier cannot solve. You picture them the way rumors do German officers stalking through galleries with their hands behind their backs, as if in a museum at home, and finding nothing but the blankness that mocks a certainty. Some smile with the politeness of men who have arrived at a fete after everyone has gone home. Some scowl and make notes. Some insist on opening crates that remain, as if the gods might be hiding in a box mislabeled plaster. In the offices, drawers have been emptied of everything but dust and paper clips. In a basement corridor, a chalk arrow in a curator's hand points to a door that now opens onto nothing but broom handles. Absence becomes the first cleverness of the war. The treasures do not sleep in a single castle like a fairy tale. They are scattered across a map like constellations someone has tried to memorize. Chateau cellars smell of mold and straw and paint oil. Night watchmen become saints of silence. In one cool hall, a crate bears a false inventory and a real one underneath. In another, a statue reclines under blankets sewn by village women who do not speak of their stitches. The convoy lists are kept in duplicate one for the galleries, one tucked inside a coat that will never be searched because its owner's expression is unarrestable. Between stations, drivers pull into ditches to let German convoys pass and stare straight ahead until the dust settles on the tarpaulins, the way blessed ash settles on a brow. Not everything vanishes in time. Looting has its own administration. You hear names whispered with contempt and fear, the cultural commandos who catalog, seize, ship, furniture, paintings, tapestries. Silver items that used to live in salons and stairwells begin to travel east, tucked into trains that wear paperwork like armor. In a pale building near the Tuileries, a modest museum is repurposed into a sorting room, where walls are lined not with art, but with theft. A woman with a librarian's bun and a conductor's ear sits quietly at a desk that belongs to the occupier and writes down everything: dates, crate numbers, destinations murmured carelessly in corridors. She listens, she records, she does not raise her voice. It will turn out that listening saves better than shouting. The Ritz, long a kind of secular chapel to appetite, acquires a reputation for glitter that hurts your teeth to think about. A broad man in brocade drifts down its corridors wearing rings that never saw a store, tastes the city with the bored greed of a king in exile from moderation. It is said he treats the art of others as if it were game shot on his estate. On another afternoon, an officer holds a chalice up to the light, while in a street 2 blocks away, a woman barters a serving spoon for a half loaf of bread. The contrast is not lost on anyone. It is painted, life-size, on the faces of the people queuing outside. The librarians, too, become partisans. Near the Sorbonne, men and women in cardigans hide manuscripts the way smugglers hide contraband under ordinary things: coat racks, piles of torn newspapers, the innocent geography of dust. Index cards grow new numbers in the margins. Ledgers acquire an extra line, then another, like a heartbeat quickening under a blanket. In an attic, a scholar overwrites the title of a medieval book with a farmer's almanac in a hand, so convincingly dull that an officer's glance skitters across it like light. It is mundane work, this saving of thought, which is why it is so heroic. The tales multiply, and you do not try to separate rumor from truth because both keep you warm. A small gallery empties overnight. In the frames, instead of real canvases, clever forgeries age quickly the way masks stick to sweaty skin. A sculptor hides a Roman head inside a block of plaster and labels it for student practice. When a sergeant knocks on the studio door, the sculptor grumbles about lazy apprentices and shows a shelf of busted noses no one wants. A truck wobbles on a country lane, and the farmer who helps write it never admits to anyone he recognized the curves of a familiar smile under canvas. You cannot prove these stories, but you walk straighter after hearing them. Yet the thefts are undeniable. Dealers who once hung luminous names now hang polite euphemisms. Provenance under review. Private sale. A respected family wakes to find their dining room scraped clean. Even the rails where pictures hung marked like tan lines. Entire collections disappear into private estates the occupiers call hunting lodges, because hunting sounds sporty and not like hunger for what belongs to others. You stand before a shuttered storefront and feel that the glass reflects not your face, but the outline of a loss no one will tally properly for decades. The Louvre remains a ghost, which is different from a ruin. Guards keep their stations. A director's office maintains a neat disorder. The cleaning lady still dusts where dust will be judged by no visitor. A conservator checks humidity as if humidity could be persuaded by politeness. In the Grande Galerie, your footsteps echo as if practicing for the applause that will one day come back. On a sill in a side corridor, a curator has left a pencil sharpened to a legal point. You consider stealing it and do not, because your theft would be the only one here that would matter to your conscience. On the bridges at dusk, students argue the question that will outlive the war. Will it all return? One insists that paintings once gone are gone into private rooms where laughter smells of leather and smoke, that art prefers money to flags. The other argues for the stubbornness of nationhood and for the tenacity of the woman with the bun and the notebook, who keeps track even when everyone else keeps quiet. You listen and change sides twice before the hour. In the end, you find yourself believing both that some will come back, carried like saints down the nave of the nation, and some will never look out over crowds again. Meanwhile, Paris, forced to live on paper promises and empty frames, becomes its own museum. Posters replace tapestries, uniforms replace portraits, parades replace processions. The city's statuary stands in gardens with an expression that reads, depending upon the light, as patience or disdain. No one can crate the wind through the chestnut trees or the long drape of the river at 5 in the afternoon. No one can requisition the way evening lands on a zinc roof. Like a gentler kind of snow in churches, stained glass throws color on palms held open for sacraments and for ration stubs. The glass is older than this moment and will be older than the next. You find you can close your eyes and walk a gallery that empty walls cannot erase. The Mona Lisa hangs where she always hangs in your mind, her small, tireless smile a kind of covenant. The great Hellenistic wings tilt, ready to lift, on a staircase that echoes with shoes no one wears today. You know the paintings by their absences, as if intimacy consisted not in possession, but in a ritual of recalling. It occurs to you that hiding has transformed them. They are now more than paint and a stone. They are secrets kept by a nation that can keep secrets. You think of the men and women who, in 1939, chose logistics over lamentation. A deputy director with patient eyes and a talent for inventory. A registrar who could fold gentleness into orders without weakening either. A driver who learned not to brake on curves because the sculptures remember jolts. You do not know their names, not all of them, but you carry their work like a talisman. In a city where betrayal can be a profession, their fidelity to the inanimate becomes an ethics. What we love, we move. What we value, we hide. What we cannot keep, we deny the thief. One afternoon, rain comes hard and fast, and a corner of pasted propaganda peels back to reveal a faded concert bill for a pianist the city claimed as its own. People stop and read the thin black type and imagine an evening that smelled of varnish and cologne and routine, then walk on through weather that will not make its mind up. You realize that all over Paris layers are loosening. When the wind is right, you can smell varnish again. You finish your circuit of the museum that is not and turn toward the river. Barges push along with the patience of beasts. The bridges count your steps for you. The occupiers may put their hands in drawers and find nothing, may send crates east wrapped in authority and twine, may raise glasses in stolen apartments. But the fact remains, Paris knows what it has and where it has put it. The past is out at the chateau tonight, sleeping in the straw. When it comes home, it will not explain itself. It will step back onto its pedestals and hang itself on its hooks and be looked at by school children who will never understand how close they came to studying only reproductions. And that is as it should be. You cross the Pont Royal with the rain on your face and the certainty, fragile but serviceable, that some things can be hidden long enough to be saved. You step from the blackout into a lobby that glows like a remembered afternoon. The cinema on Boulevard Saint-Michel smells of dust and cigarettes and the varnish of old seats. No butter, no sugar, nothing to betray the era but the thinness of the paper tickets. Outside, the city walks with its shoulders up. Inside, everyone lowers them at once, as if crossing a frontier without papers. A pianist used to sit near the stage to warm up the screen before the reels began. Now the projector alone supplies music, a clatter and purr that soothes like a train you're not boarding. The newsreel arrives first, as it must banners and eagles, tanks that do not seem to weigh what they crush, parades that look like a certainty. The narrator's voice has a polished shine you recognize from cutlery laid on tables you will not visit. People clap because that is what the room expects. The applause is tidy and brief, a receipt rather than a celebration. The light from the screen washes every face the same color. You cannot tell who believes, who pretends to, who is counting seconds to the feature. The reel ends with maps that look like games played by men who never run out of pieces. The lights hesitate, then dim again. The feature is a romance, the language familiar and mild, the costumes a kind of nostalgia that floats an inch above the floor. Lovers misread each other charmingly. Doors open at the right moment. A later arrives at last instead of too late. No one on the screen cues, no one whispers at a window, no one watches the clock for curfew. A woman in the next row leans forward with the concentration of someone learning to breathe. A German officer 2 rows ahead laughs in the correct places, and you feel the weirdness of hating the shape of a laugh. Someone coughs, someone else presses the cough into a sleeve to make it smaller. For 90 minutes, a city is permitted to forget its own weather. When the film releases you, the lobby light is too yellow to be noon and too warm to be night. You walk out into blackout and find the seam between make-believe and stoned with your foot. At the corner, a poster for next week's program advertises a comedy with a smile that asks forgiveness in advance. The usher peels a corner of it smooth with a thumb, as if striking a bargain with paper. Music seeks basements and finds them. In Montmartre, a door with no sign opens to a stair that smells of spilled wine and damp coats. Inside, candles make little lakes on tables. A clarinet lifts a line like a kite. A violin answers as if arguing in a language that cannot be censored. They call it jazz, whether or not it matches the exact tempo swing, diluted by scarcity and stiff fingers, but alive, officially. Someone somewhere frowns at these rhythms. Practically, a young corporal sits near the wall and keeps his cap on his knee and watches the pianist's left hand with the student's respect. When the trumpet finds a phrase that sounds like a dare, heads rise, people clap softly, not because they are shy of joy, but because joy has learned to walk softly. You leave with the rhythm still striding in your ribs, a private escort to curfew. The radio is both danger and sacrament. In a kitchen where the window is double blanketed and the clock is covered to keep it from telling on you, a friend turns the dial with the delicacy of a safecracker. Official stations drone like a sermon. You cannot contradict a loud efficiency. Destiny, gratitude. You spin past them with a finger that has learned the feel of a foreign signal, the clipped consonants that travel farther than breath, the hiss that belongs to the sky, and then a sentence in French that does not belong to Paris and therefore belongs to you. The voice does not know your name, so it says citizen. It does not know your street, so it says courage. The news is half rumor and half hope. The hope matters more than the rumor. Afterwards, the set is wrapped again in his quilt like sleeping child, and the silence that follows is louder than the broadcast. To be caught listening is to be caught believing. You wash the cups as if that were an alibi. Books persist the way weeds do quietly, in cracks. In the Latin Quarter, second-hand stalls still open their shutters at shy hours, and a new title arrives like a loaf that must be divided into slices too thin to satisfy. Banned authors travel inside harmless covers. A satire masquerades as a cookbook. A poem hides in the back of a manual for furnace repair. The bouquinistes along the river stand with hands in pockets, and the kind of indifference that is a practiced cover for devotion. You buy a slim book of verse whose pages have been turned by hands that respect paper like bread, and you read it by a stub of candle until the wax fails. Words feed another hunger. When the poem mentions light, you do not need to forgive it. You know exactly what it has in mind. The theater bows without kneeling. Comedies multiply because tragedy no longer needs playwrights. It writes itself in the streets. Yet inside small houses, lines grow hinges. An actor declares, in a farce about a misplaced umbrella, that the guest who overstays his welcome must be shown the door. And the balcony laughs too loudly, then quickly correctly. An actress moves her eyes toward the wings at a word like deliverance, and the room inhales as one. Censors hear only what they learned to hear. Audiences learn to hear around them. Curtain calls last just long enough to be ordinary. The cast bows in unison, and then the lights go to black like a throat closing around what it will not say. Not all culture is refuge. Some is harness. Posters bloom for concerts in well-lit halls where uniforms take the front rows and applause arrives on schedule. A visiting orchestra plays the right overture at the right volume, and the program calls it civilization. It is. It is also advertisement. You attend once and spend the intermission staring at a chandelier, counting bulbs to stop counting absences. On the way home, you find yourself humming a theme you wish you did not like and hate the tune for not noticing whom it served. At cafés, instruments shrink to the size of a table. A harmonica sighs without announcing itself. A waitress hums a march and then turns it inside out so that it becomes a lullaby. Someone taps a spoon against a cup in waltz time and a woman smiles into a scarf. Music cannot fill a stomach, but it can build a chair for fatigue to sit on. Sometimes, while you are cutting your bread into slices thinner than arithmetic allows, a neighbor begins to sing a worker's song under her breath. No one joins exactly, everyone listens with their shoulders. Children learn the rules of art by watching adults violate them gracefully. A boy draws a tram with charcoal stolen from the stove and adds a star to the window that should not be there. His mother takes the paper and kisses his head and folds the picture into the drawer where she keeps ration stamps, as if to add a little of his audacity to their arithmetic. A girl plats red, white, blue ribbon into her hair from scraps scavenged from a cousin's notions box. Her father unties it without anger and reties it on the inside hem of her dress, where it thumps her knee when she walks like a secret. Libraries are both less and more than they were. A reading room at the Sorbonne offers warmth disguised as knowledge. Students sit with their coats still on and turn pages with reverence that may be piety or may be tactics. A librarian with a face built for silence points you to a shelf that is not in the catalog. You take what you're given and return it wrapped in paper, like meat. Somewhere else in the same building, a list of forbidden authors lies face down on a desk, and someone puts a pot of flowers on it, because a pot of flowers is the correct size for a small act of rebellion. Evening returns to its colony of basements. In the cellar, where last week you heard jazz, tonight you hear a ballad that belonged to your grandmother. People who never sang in public add their careful voices to the chorus. The German at the wall regards his cigarette, and then the ceiling, and then his boots, and you find yourself feeling sorry for him for knowing none of the words. It is not generous, it is a reflex you forgive in yourself on the way home. There is, beneath all of this, a ledger you cannot see but can feel for every sanctioned newsreel, an underground paragraph for every poster boasting of order, a song that remembers how to be unruly, for every evening dressed in uniforms, a night dressed in paperbacks. Art does not stop the knocks at doors or the trucks at dawn, but it keeps language from forgetting how to open itself. It keeps wrists from forgetting how to turn a page. It keeps the city from becoming only what it endures. One night, after a film suite as an unspent ration, and before the siren that will send you to the cellar, you stand on a bridge and listen to a violin float up from a window you cannot locate. The note holds longer than the river's patience, then resolves itself the way a sentence does when it finally finds its verb. You think tomorrow there will be cues again and rules again? Tonight there was also a cadence. You walk home in the dark and realize that the past used to be a gallery. Now it is a theater, a page, a song, portable, memorized, passed hand to hand like contraband and blessing. You notice it first in the faces that will not look up. The city has always carried worry like a handbag, but this is different heads lowered not from shyness or etiquette, but from the wish to be less visible. Then the decree arrives, printed in the calm black of official certainty, and posted where bread lists used to hang Jews must wear a star. The paper uses nouns and numbers. The street answers with silence. In a tailor's shop, a mother holds a square of yellow cloth that looks like sunshine caught in a net. The tailor's hands tremble as he bastes the points onto a small jacket, the needle lifting and diving with a care too tender for a requirement so cruel. The boy watches, curious. Then the mother folds him into her arms as if she can sew protection into him by holding on long enough. You see the stars everywhere once you know how to look. In the market queue, on the metro platform, on a schoolboy's blazer too carefully brushed. Some wear them straight and ironed, some crooked as if to insist that obedience is not agreement. People react as they always have averted eyes, quick kindnesses, hard stares, averted eyes again. A woman in line at the bakery mutters, "At least it isn't us," and another woman whispers, "Not yet." And both sentences lodge under your ribs like stones that will not pass. The star's yellow is specific. Your shame has no color but spreads anyway. Restrictions multiply with the efficiency of mold. Benches in Luxembourg gardens earn new plaques that declare who may not sit down. The wood looks both newly planed and permanently stained. A librarian turns away a child with a careful false regret that tastes of chalk. A cinema refuses a family at the door, and the usher's gloved hand hovers in the air after they go, as if it cannot figure out what to do with itself. Signs sprout like weeds, interdit aux Juifs. The signs are precise, the hurt they author is not. In one district, shop windows paint warnings no one could mistake. In another, a shopkeeper refuses and wakes to broken glass. He calls the wind rather than betrayal, because it is easier to sweep a story than to remember who threw it. Rumors travel faster than ration lines, trucks at dawn, doors forced, neighbors gathered in stairwells in their night clothes, children torn from the safest rooms they know. One morning in July 1942, the echo grows closer sirens, not of planes, but of police cars. Buses arrive where trams should be. In buildings like yours, hands fumble at locks. In courtyards like yours, suitcases appear as if by sleight of hand. You watch from a crack in the shutter because watching feels like duty and like cowardice at the same time. The stairwell is filled with footsteps not going to work. Across the hall, a girl 8, 9 clutches a doll and a bag big enough for a lifetime that will not fit inside it. Her father steps forward with papers and the posture of a man who still believes in grammar. He does not know the buses do not speak that language. They call it a roundup, a word too domestic for the geometry of it. The Vélodrome d'Hiver swallows more than 13,000 in 2 days. Men, women, children, its oval track circled by hunger, its air thick with the ordinary miseries of the human body, multiplied by a number too large to imagine. You will never see inside, but the city hears the heat, the thirst, the single tap, the cries that echo along a ceiling built for speed, not waiting. Outside, people walk past, trying not to count the buses and counting anyway. Inside, mothers invent games to keep children from learning a lesson too early, how to wait for help that does not come. Later, trains will carry these families away from stations that used to mean summer and sea. You will not go to those stations, but you will hear their departure in the gaps they leave behind. Complicity has a French grammar, and the city will spend years arguing over its tenses. It is not only German uniforms knocking, French policemen in tidy caps fill forms with neat handwriting, whistles blow with domestic finality, bicycles lean against walls, patiently waiting for officers to return. There are orders and there is zeal. There are men who follow and men who improve upon what they have been told. When you pass a precinct later that week, you feel a cold that does not come from shade. A clerk closes a window against flies. Paperwork keeps the heat out. Nothing keeps the heat in. After the buses, absence becomes a resident. The shop that sold notebooks is shuttered. The apartment where the piano used to be has its blinds drawn. The school desk with the good groove at the right edge is empty. You measure the city by what you do not hear a laugh in the staircase. A radio turned too loud above the fishmonger. A boy's ball bouncing against the courtyard wall. Even the cat that used to be fed on the third-floor landing waits at the wrong door. You do not ask aloud if the cat counts. You cannot bear to know whether kindness has a species. And still, even here, the small, fierce lights. A priest baptizes a name that can pass a checkpoint without flinching. A doctor writes a certificate in Latin to buy a week for a family. A neighbor takes two children by the shoulders and says, "You will visit your aunt." And the word aunt refits itself to mean any doorway that opens. A seamstress stitches stars onto coats for coin because she must, then stitches two shorter hems in a single night and will not take payment because she will not. A concierge looks at a list and says, "Wrong building," and keeps saying it until the men go next door. A farmer uncle comes at dusk with a cart piled with laundry and leaves with two small bundles that do not make a sound. You hear these stories, and then their mirror images, the informers, the thieves of apartments, and you learn to let both kinds of truth sit on the same shelf without kicking each other off. The propaganda sharpens its teeth. Posters with caricatures you will not describe to yourself appear at the familiar corners. Pamphlets warn against pity as if pity were a disease. Children see these pictures because they live at child height. Mothers jerk them away because the pictures will cling if you look too long. The papers claim order has been restored. The street knows what order looks like when it wears a uniform. You tear a poster once in a lane with no name and run like a boy for 2 blocks, heart laughing and lungs on fire. And afterwards, you will wonder if your tiny damage mattered to anyone but you. You decide that this is not the question to ask. Avenue Foch acquires a reputation that does not depend on rumors. The building looks like all of the others, stone, polite, windows that keep their secrets, but the ground in front of it remembers every footstep. You avoid that side of the street. You cross too early. You rehearse in your head the sentences you would say if you were ever led behind those doors. I do not know. I did not see. I am hungry. I am sorry. You practice calm the way some people practice piano, and you understand the difference between an exercise and a performance is an audience you hope never to meet. Time staggers. Weeks after the roundup, you still wake early and listen for buses that do not come. You stand too long at a window and invent ways to make a city less empty. Leave a loaf on a sill. Feed the cat on the 3rd floor landing. Answer letters addressed to the names that have gone, just to keep the postman honest. You know this is not how mail works. You do it anyway. Neighbors learn the calculus of whispering. They took the boy from the 3rd floor. No, the uncle got him out to where don't ask. The not asking becomes part of the help. You begin to understand that in a city where everything is posted, the bravest thing one can do is refuse to publish what one knows. When a leaflet appears, France cannot abandon her children. You read it once and burn it, and the ash floats like a kind of prayer. Some resist by crouching, some by running, some by walking steadily to the market and buying onions with a dignity that does not request permission. You do what you can, carry a note, pretend to be deaf at a question, turn your body into a brief wall where a small person can hide. None of it is enough. All of it is something. One evening, at the edge of curfew, you pass a boy with a yellow star and a set jaw. He holds his school books like bricks and looks at no one. A soldier passes him without seeing, and the boy's shoulders lift a fraction as if he has swapped a stone from one pocket to the other. You tell yourself that the world witnessed an event. The truth is, The world witnessed a moment. Moments are what you have to work with. There will be more raids in other months, other years. Names will be learned and then forgotten and then learned again with the guilt one keeps like a receipt. You will discover later words you wish you had had at the time: Drancy, convoy, deportation, and they will not help you sleep. You will also learn how many were hidden, how many were saved in convents and under farm roofs and behind wardrobes. Those numbers will not repair any absence, but they will keep the city's verdict on itself from hardening too quickly. For now, you are a citizen of July, and July is a month made of doors opening at the wrong hour. One afternoon, you pass the tailor shop again. The window holds an empty mannequin, a cushion studded with pins, a spool of yellow thread. You cannot tell whether the thread was left there on purpose or by accident. You choose purpose. It is a poor prayer, but it is yours. You walk on with your head up because looking down has never helped anyone find their way, and because the city must keep looking even at what it cannot bear, or else it will learn to see only what flatters it. The Seine moves as always, unimpressed by posters and decrees. You stop on the bridge and watch the water carrying the sky, and you promise the names you know and the ones you do not, that you will not forget them into silence. It is a small promise in a large city. It is the size of a human mouth. The password isn't a word at all. It's a look that lasts half a second longer than custom allows, or a question asked as if about the weather. Do you know where one might find? The tail of the sentence falls away, and the listener nods if he is the right listener. The official economy speaks in posters and stamped cards. The other one moves in murmurs and knocks. You hear it first, the way you smelled coffee that wasn't before you tasted it you knew, because hunger sharpens not just the stomach. Cues lengthen as rations thin, and arithmetic becomes biography. Bread points vanish by Tuesday. Meat coupons are promises no butcher can honor. Butter has turned into a rumor with a price. In the doorway of your building, a neighbor whispers au marché noir, as if reciting a prayer and a confession at once. You pretend to shrug. Later, you will follow the shrug down a narrow street and find a door without a sign, and you will learn how doors without signs have more rules than doors with them. Inside is warmth that feels like treachery. The air smells of fat and onions and something else you have to name twice before you trust your memory ham. A woman with eyes that measure everything asks what you have to trade. Money buys very little now. Francs are paper that burns too quickly. You list your life aloud: an extra shawl, a bracelet your aunt left you, a bottle of scent with a label that makes the room remember a different year. She weighs your things with her hands as if they were produce, and then names a price that is not obscene so much as precise. A sausage changes custody. You slide it into your coat as if tucking in a child. For an hour you will walk differently, with one shoulder lower, as if guilt had mass. All over Paris, this shadow market flowers like a night-blooming plant. Boys carry baskets that seem too heavy for them and quote figures with the quick arithmetic of card sharps. A porter on the metro whispers that there will be eggs tomorrow by the station with the cracked clock. A concierge discovers that coal can be measured not only in kilos but also in favors, and that keeping a ledger in your head is safer than keeping one in a drawer. Farmers' cousins appear with crates that look like laundry and that smell like salvation. You see men in suits who never had dirt under their nails bargaining with men who never wore cuffs. The city learns a new grammar of need. The moral map blurs. One woman buys butter because her child coughs all night. Another because she refuses to permit the war to reach her toast. A butcher who laughs with soldiers by day keeps a packet of kidneys for an old neighbor by night. A policeman looks away while a sack changes hands because he remembers standing next to that man at Verdun. Another takes his share because he can. You watch, you judge, and then you catch yourself unable to decide where survival ends and sin begins. Hunger has a way of untangling that knot for you, then tying it again tighter the next morning. There is peril stitched into the seams. Patrols raid at odd hours and the news travels faster than boots. They've hit Belleville. They're checking baskets on the line to Montparnasse. You memorize the nearest alley that bends twice, the doorway that opens on a courtyard with 2 exits, the corner where the lamplight doesn't reach. Once a boy barely 12 offers you butter at a price that hurts. He tilts the paper open enough for you to smell the real thing. You pay, and he vanishes the way sparrows do when a cat appears. Later, you hear he was caught and then released because a sergeant thought of his own son. You are not sure whether to be grateful for the kindness or angry at the power that owns it. In kitchens, recipes become engineering. Bread is stretched with grated potato. A hero of the dinner table is a rutabaga persuaded to impersonate a roast. Housewives exchange formulas in the language of battle, how to thicken with a spoon of flour stolen from tomorrow, how to turn coffee from acorns into something that does not make the tongue despair. A neighbor produces a jar of jam that tastes faintly of summer. She has traded a ring for it, and you pretend not to see the paleness where the ring used to live. When you share the jam on slices cut thin as patience, the entire room goes quiet the way churches go quiet before a hymn. The black market is not only food, stockings appear that were not knit in France. A tube of lipstick with a foreign scent sits on a counter as if waiting for a particular pair of hands. A length of silk is folded into a parcel so small it could be mistaken for a secret. You watch a young woman buy color with the same concentration a man gives to buying bread. There is a fierceness to that transaction that feels like defiance if the occupier can regulate calories. He shall not regulate glamour. Later, the same woman will take her lipstick off with a hasty scrap of towel at her door because opulence and prudence occupy the same face in alternating shifts. Beyond the city, a separate economy runs on tires and breath. Cyclists ride out before dawn, frames creaking under sacks of carrots that will become coins, that will become cigarettes, that will become favors, that will become flour again. The road learns their names at checkpoints. Papers and faces are read with equal skepticism. Some return with their loads intact. Some return with stories instead of goods. Some do not return. In a village, one department away, a farmer's wife shakes a city hand and fills it with eggs that will arrive in Paris -2, because even mercy has a toll when it travels. Judgment, like everything else, is rationed. In the stairwells, voices harden around words like profiteur and parasite. At the same time, a child sleeps with milk in his stomach because someone's greed intersected with someone else's affection, and the mathematics worked out for once. You hold both facts at once until your arms ache. It is possible for a thing that keeps people alive to also shame them. It is possible for an act that shames a city to keep it from dying. This is not cleverness, it is fatigue learning honesty. You make mistakes because everyone does. You follow a rumor to an address and find only a door that opens onto a room with 3 chairs and a table and 2 men who ask your name as if it were a price. You leave with your name intact because you have learned the correct lie. I'm shopping for my neighbor with the limp. Another night, you hide a parcel under your coat and a patrol turns the corner early. You button your guilt into neatness and practice the world's oldest defense: be ordinary. The sergeant glances past you at nothing in particular. On the other side of the escort, you permit yourself a breath that tastes like cheese. Sometimes the trades make a sound you will remember longer than the taste: the click of a wedding clasp opening, the soft clink of a silver spoon set on a counter, the sharp tear of paper folded around bacon, and then around a story you will not retell. In the ledger of your mind, the columns do not balance. You begin to keep a separate book for gratitude: this name, this loaf, that night when a stranger said, "No charge," and meant I remember being human. Raids come like bad weather predicted, still startling. A poster appears warning of penalties. The poster is ignored because the price of ignoring is lower today than the price of obeying. When the trucks pull up and the inspectors spill into the market like a slice of cold, baskets are abandoned mid-haggle, footsteps scatter, an onion rolls under a stall and waits for the world to grow quiet again. The next morning, the market is there as if it had never been there at all, and the city pretends to have dreamed a feast. There is a deeper, quieter trade running through the same channels: information. A butcher who buys his pork from a cousin out past Versailles also sells direction for where to find a sympathetic priest. A woman who brokers butter can broker a message inside a loaf if your request is humble and your face steady. You carry notes once or twice tucked inside crust and discover that paper can feel heavier than meat. In your palm, a folded square weighs as much as a risk. On a wet evening, you come home with a heel of cheese, a bundle of leeks, and the conviction you have betrayed someone you have not yet met. You place the cheese on the table and sit without moving, listening to the rain as if it were a verdict. Then you cut 3 equal slices and carry one to the widow, down the hall, and one to the family with the coughing child, and you keep the smallest for yourself. It is not absolution. It is a habit you decide to keep. The authorities make boasting of efficiency a kind of propaganda. They announce seizures by weight: so many kilos of this, so many of that, numbers that move no one who has waited in a queue that led nowhere. The market answers with a shrug and a new address. When an alley is burned, a cellar opens. When a middleman is arrested, a cousin steps forward with a new smile. The shadow economy is not moral. It is elastic. What it cannot justify, it replaces with momentum. And yet, for all its grime, it proves something the occupier never intended to prove: the city's stubborn refusal to eat only what it is told it is allowed to eat. In the same week, you trade an heirloom for a sack of flour and learn a song in a basement that makes people clap with their palms and not their rings. and you understand that appetite cannot be fully organized. Hunger can be commanded. Appetite slips the leash. One night, you light a candle and slice your bread with more reverence than ceremony. You spread on it a whisper of butter that should not exist, and you take a bite, and you allow yourself to taste without explanation to admit that this, too, is survival. Across the hall, someone laughs, a short laugh that sounds like a pot boiling at last. Outside, boots pass, the old meter of occupation. Inside, the knife rests, the last crumb is chased into a corner, and the city inventive, compromised. Alive adds another small victory to the ledger it does not show anyone. You learn the weight of footsteps. In the first months of occupation, boots were background metronomes that kept a new, unwelcome time. Later, they become instruments of measurement. How many on the landing do they pause or pass? Is there leather creak officers or the softer rush of cloth police doors, which used to be thresholds, become barometers? Every knock is weather. You rehearse, not lines from the theater, but sentences that might save you. I was asleep. I heard nothing. I do not know him well. I am only a clerk. You file them under your tongue like papers in order of urgency. Rumor has an address, and it is a number you step around the long, polished severity of Avenue Foch. The building looks like any other grand Parisian address, stone-gloved in ivy. Windows that blink rarely, but the pavement in front of it knows more than the stone admits. People cross the street early to avoid passing too near, as if dread were contagious at 50 paces. You tell yourself you're only superstitious, and then you see a car roll up at dawn. Its doors open the way smiles do in photographs, and two men get out with the efficiency of gravity. They do not raise their voices. The door they enter is always the right one. The arrests have a rhythm. The city hates itself for learning. Sometimes there is a list typed too neatly for accident. Sometimes there is a quota no one explains aloud. Sometimes there is only revenge for a thing that happened 2 arrondissements away. A patrol harried, a guardhouse grenade, a poster defaced by night. You come to understand that guilt has become divisible. When it cannot be placed on one body, it is shared among many. Hostages are taken the way weather takes laundry from a line. A man who runs a newsstand, a student who carries too many books, a factory foreman with a posture that looks like leadership in silhouette all become tallies, counters in a game no one consented to play. There are posters that shout and posters that whisper. The shouting ones are red or black and stamped with a font that pretends to be justice. They begin with words like avius and continue with names, ages, professions, crimes so broad they could include breathing. They are pasted at eye level near bakeries and tram stops, and they work as intended. You stop. You read. Your stomach changes its mind about hunger. Sometimes the list ends with a place, fusillés shot beyond the city, on a hill whose silhouette the sun blesses each evening, as if ignorant of what the hill is asked to witness. Later you will learn to say the hill's name quietly, Mont Valérien, and to picture not landscape, but a wall. The whispering posters come later, photographs of men with foreign names and captions that tell you they are criminals, that they are not like you, that your fear is righteous. The paper calls them a band. The faces call them sons. Someone writes in pencil beneath one of the pictures, "They died for us." The sentence stays a day before a brush erases it, but by then the city has copied it into its memory. You will be surprised, years from now, how much pencil can resist water. Informers are an arithmetic lesson you would rather fail. Everyone claims to recognize them. No one admits to knowing one. The concierge who speaks too much with the wrong visitors. The man in the queue whose questions come with quiet intent. Did you hear the BBC last night? Does your cousin still work at the depot? Where do they gather on Thursdays? Sometimes it is nothing. Sometimes it is exactly what it feels like. A neighbor greets you with a cheerfulness that is a shade too bright, and you spend an afternoon hating yourself for suspecting good manners. Then a boy is taken from the fourth floor, and the cheerfulness deserts the stairwell for a week. You learn the city's new topography frames not as a suburb, but as a prison. A name you do not speak in kitchens because it ruins bread. A fort beyond the western skyline that is no longer a fort, but a verb. A courtyard where vans swing in and out so smoothly the cobbles never cool. There are other addresses too, less official and uglier: the townhouse, with the curtains drawn where French voices do German work. The doorbells at such places are said to be polite. The walls are not. You pass one on an errand and discover that the stone can look guilty. There's also, always, the stairwell. A knock in the middle of the night empties homes into those narrow spirals of air and echo. Keys are mislaid on purpose. Papers hide under floorboards that creak too loudly. People become luggage folded small, tucked into cupboards, hushed with the fierce tenderness of mothers. Sometimes this theater works. Sometimes the steps keep climbing. Your own door has learned the script. The chain slid silently. The catch lifted as if nothing were at stake but draft. Once, when your turn comes, the men in coats ask only about a tenant you barely know, and they leave with his name and a smell of cold that lingers. You stand for a long time, hand on the knob, as if holding shut the sea. Reprisals invent a bureaucratic poetry. When a patrol is attacked, notices appear announcing executions with a clerk's tidiness. 5 men at dawn, 10 the next day. The city gasps and then moves again because it must. People leave flowers where no one can forbid flowers, a scratch of color near a wall, a ribbon tied around a lamp post, a name written in match black on a stone and rubbed away by morning. The little rites do not change the arithmetic. They alter the air. Children learn to measure adult silence. Games of soldier disappear from courtyards. Hopscotch returns because numbers that obey chalk are friendlier. A girl asks why the posters call people terrorists. Her mother says the word means someone who frightens someone else. And the child frowns and says, then the posters are the terrorists. And the mother kisses her hair instead of answering because grammar, too, is dangerous now. Resistance makes a sound the city knows it is the sound of a bicycle with a loose fender, of a knock that is twice and then once, of type hammered onto damp paper in a room that smells of potatoes and ink. Every time a wire is cut or a switch thrown or a leaflet dropped, someone's risk is enlarged to include the rest of us. The occupiers answer with raids calibrated like recipes. So much of this group, so much of that quarter, stir. You understand the paradox acts meant to prove the city's soul endanger its body. You understand, too, that without the acts, the soul starves. At cafés, the caution that used to be etiquette becomes survival. A laugh too loud can be a map to your table. A confidence offered abruptly can be a net. You discover the beauty of the shrug. You collect unspecific words and speak in them over there. Later, someone, once a man you barely know, leans in and asks whether you would carry a folded paper for a cousin who cannot go out. You have learned to say no without seeming to, but you say yes, and for a block and a half you experience the intense life that belongs to people who do not intend to die. The night raids are a curriculum. You learn to sleep in clothes, to keep a small bag by the door with the objects that prove you are you, to fold money into the hem of your coat because pockets are invitations. You learn the building's voices, which step squeaks, which hinge a sighs, which neighbor's cough announces the hour. In the cellar, during a search upstairs, you sit with the strangers and breathe as if there were a rule about not using up the air. No one speaks, but sentences are present if they take me. Will you tell? Here's where the key is. This is my sister's name. There's cruelty without spectacle. Men return with hands that will not hold cups. Women return with eyes that will not look at windows. Some do not return, and the wards of hospitals learn new patients, the city's patience. A priest who once blessed bread now blesses bandages with the same gravity. A doctor's hands grow steadier by shrinking their hopes. And still, alongside the fear, a counter-traffic. A police clerk misfiles a warrant and misfiles it again the next day. A guard leaves a door unlocked 1 minute too long. A tram driver takes 30 seconds at a stop for a passenger who is not there because the seconds will be useful to someone who is. On a Sunday morning, the church bells sound slightly out of step, and in that a strange beat, you hear a message not written in any book. The occupiers think they own the hours. The city borrows them anyway. One afternoon, after a poster announces 10 executions for an ambush in a district you never visit, you pass a wall where someone has chalked a name you recognize from the sheet. The chalk line is thick, the hand awkward, the letters brave as toddlers. You stand there longer than prudence recommends. A child on a scooter skims past and spells the name aloud without understanding that names can be bullets and bandages at once. You go home by a longer route because grief makes you superstitious about corners. By now, fear has a ritual you could write out blindfolded. By now, so does endurance. You set an extra plate because the habit of welcoming refuses to die just because danger has learned the address. You share a rumor and then take it back and then share it again. Because hope, too, insists on having a social life. You sleep badly and wake early and go to the queue and keep your face ordinary. You keep your face ordinary even in front of your own mirror because vanity is a luxury and so is terror. And at night, when the stairwell breathes, you do not pray for heroism. You pray for quiet, for your name to remain only your name, for the city to make it to morning with as many of its doors unbroken as possible. You hear it first, the way you hear summer before you feel it, a change in the air, a hum that seems to arrive from the edges of your bones. The engines are not visible. The blackout makes the sky a lid, but the note builds until it is more than a sound, until the window panes vibrate, until the teacup on the table makes its own small music. Someone at the opposite window leans out and whispers the word that is half wish, half warning anglais. Then come the sirens, that sawtooth wail that slices every thought into smaller pieces alert. You move with the neighbors into the stairwell slicked by 100 hands, then into the cellar that knows every shoe by name. The air smells of chalk and wool and potatoes gone earthy in their sack. An old man has brought a stool. A child has brought a wooden horse with one wheel. Someone has remembered a candle stub. No one has remembered courage. You sit on crates and look at the mortar between stones as if it were a text that might tell you what comes next. Above, the engines stitch a relentless seam from west to east. Somewhere, searchlights comb the sky with white rakes. Somewhere, anti-aircraft guns answer with an angry punctuation you feel in your chest. A thud in the distance shakes dust from the joists. The cellar inhales as if it were an animal and then tries not to exhale. Another thud, nearer, felt more than heard, and the woman beside you squeezes your arm hard enough to convince your bones to remember they are a cage. There are prayers whispered, yes, and also the practical liturgy of mothers. Sit still. Close your eyes. Think of the sea. A harmonica emerges, apologetic as a waiter with nothing left to serve, and plays the only tune it knows. When the all clear finally wobbles into its long, unsteady line, fin d'alerte. No one stands right away. The silence has to learn to carry its own weight again. The next morning, the rumor lines run faster than trams. A railway yard at La Chapelle, perhaps a factory in Boulogne-Billancourt, lines twisted like licorice, brick powdered into a grief that cannot find its voice. You walk because everyone walks to where the smoke is a darker gray, and you find what bombing always leaves geometry undone. A building is a dollhouse split in two. A bed shows its iron ribs to the street. A calendar flaps against the one nail that did not lose heart. People sweep. People cry. People stand with their mouths open like doorways and make no sound at all. A German officer writes in a notebook, and the pencil seems to scrape your teeth. The city argues with itself. There are those who whisper, good, because tracks that cannot carry guns and coal cannot carry conquest. There are those who mutter curses meant for the Allies because the rubble is French. The bodies are French. The streets are French. And grief has no patience for your strategy. You carry both sentences in your pocket and discover your coat is heavy with contradictions. At home, you fold your ration card into the hymnal of memory and tell yourself that the engines meant you well, even if their maps could not see your window. Night raids reteach you habits you thought you had mastered already. Shoes by the bed, coat over the chair, packet of identity papers under the pillow, money folded into the hem. You learn to read the sky by sound, the deep, deliberate rumble that does not hunt you, the brighter, quicker insect buzz that patrols. On some nights, the planes pass over on their way to the west, and you feel something like pride. On others, the hum lingers, and you imagine the city seen from above as a black lake dotted with the stubborn brightness of a single cigarette. You wish for rain not because the fields need it, but because flak sounds smaller in rain. There are shelters beyond cellars, metro stations, damp as the underbellies of fish, fill with people improvised into families for the length of a night. Benches become pews, tiled walls echo lullabies. A priest you recognize from a street 4 streets away sits without his collar and holds a boy's head the way a father would. Someone brings a pack of cards and plays patience out loud. explaining each move as if instructing time. Lovers learn to kiss while counting siren cycles. A young woman falls asleep on a stranger's shoulder and wakes with an apology that sounds like a promise. The theater of the sky can be terrible and beautiful on the same minute hand. You have stood on a rooftop after an all clear and watched searchlights undo themselves, their beams unknitting into mere night. You have seen the red arcs of tracer fire climb like furious commas and vanish into a sentence you cannot read. You have smelled the iron sour odor of new rubble mingled with the familiar bread sour of old courtyards. You have watched sparks fall from a distant burning warehouse and mistaken them for a heartbeat, for stars. Targets become a vocabulary even those who hate the lesson can recite. The marshalling yards that feed the war machine, the depots where metal grows teeth, bridges that knit a continent of orders. There are nights when you hear a particular long roll of engines and someone whispers that these are not the British, these are the Americans. And for a moment, you imagine a sky grown crowded with strangers risking their lives for a city that has forgotten its appetite for joy. You wonder about them up there, the sweat freezing in their gloves, the photographs tucked over their hearts. The way the smallest lamp on the ground might look like a tiny, deliberate act of love. The Germans do not simply endure. Batteries are set in parks where you used to feed ducks. Crews in tin hats smoke beneath the chestnuts. Searchlight crews practice their choreography until the sky itself seems to learn obedience. After heavy raids, patrols multiply. Papers are checked with an enthusiasm that tastes of spite. Posters appear scolding a universe that cannot hear. The enemy is ruthless. The enemy is criminal. The enemy will be resisted. The city reads and shrugs and goes back to gathering glass in a dustpan. It is difficult to frighten a people who have learned to measure fear in leaders. You want to say the bombs are precise. Precision is a word that loses weight when it falls from a certain height. A factory's roof and the roof of the house next to it rhyme too closely. A yard of engines and a schoolyard are cousins in the dark. You stand at a corner where a stone has been peeled back by fingers of flame, and you recognize a toy soldier whose tin hat still shines beneath soot. You pick it up and then put it down again, because picking up and putting down are the only two verbs that have not been banned. Yet the raids do something occupation cannot cancel. They prove the world still remembers the city's coordinates. The engine's drone is a ruinous lullaby that sings of a future that does not belong to the men with notebooks. In cafés, the next morning, when the windows are repapered with brown sheets and the chicory is thin as apology, people whisper about what they heard. Southwest to northeast, 2 waves. The guns in the park were late. A waiter who once merely delivered cups becomes a conductor of narratives. My sister near Juvisy says the rails glow like snakes. It is not that the news is reliable, it is that it is alive. Children make games out of what they cannot escape. They collect shrapnel like beetles, trading pieces by size and shine. They give names to the sirens' intervals: wolf, fox, sheep, and bet marbles on which animal will come next. They draw planes on a scrap paper with noses too big and wings too brave. Their parents scold softly but keep the drawings. When a boy asks you whether the man in the sky can see his kite, you say yes and then say maybe, because both answers feel like a kind of mercy. Spring of 1944 changes the tempo. The hum is heavier, the roots more frequent, the city's conversation tilted westward as if by a wind. Codes crawl out of radios like jokes that only some can understand, nonsense phrases that make grown men sit down abruptly and then stand up again without finishing their wine. Rail yards you have only ever passed by window become names you can taste. And taste is not the right verb for iron and smoke. On a night of particular fury, you hear a geometry of thunder that does not belong to weather, and you understand that someone elsewhere is drawing a map on your sky with chalk that burns. Not every bomb falls on the right noun. Every bomb writes the same adjective nearer. You go to the cellar, as always, with the bag as always, with the same set of small lies ready for if the night delivers the wrong visitors. But when the engines recede and the siren unwinds and you step into the courtyard, soaked in the peculiar sweetness that follows fear, you notice that people look at the horizon as if expecting a guest. The war, which for years has been a pressure, begins to feel like a direction. Later, when the city will argue about gratitude and grief, about tonnage and targets, you will remember less the lists and more the moments, the harmonica apologizing to the dark, the child asleep on a stranger's shoulder, the way a searchlight's beam unmade itself at dawn, the stubborn gulp of coffee shared on a doorstep still powdered with plaster. You will remember how hope and dread learned to share a chair, and you will remember, most of all, that the engines did not only carry bombs, they carried the rumor that the sky still belonged to more than one flag. The messages arrive like pebbles tapped against a window. Jean has a long mustache. The dice are on the carpet. Said plainly, they mean nothing. Heard now, they shake teaspoons. In rooms sealed with blankets and the faith of neighbors, people lean toward radios as if toward confessionals. You do not understand all of it, and that is precisely the point. The words are keys that fit locks, hidden all over the city. At the bakery queue, someone breathes, bientôt, soon. You hold the syllable in your mouth like a square of sugar. When dawn finally breaks on the morning that will later be named with a letter and a number, you do not know the letter yet, only that the air itself seems braced. By afternoon, rumors run like rain in the gutters landings in the west, a coast crowded with ships that dwarf the horizon, sand stitched with parachutes. The Germans patrol harder, the sirens multiply, and the city learns a new discipline, hope without noise. In cafés, news is passed folded into the crease of daily misery. They are ashore. In stairwells, shoulders brush with a charge that doesn't make sparks but could. On the metro, a man you've never seen before smiles for no reason and then remembers reasons and stops. The weeks turn with a rack and pinion grind bombs more frequent, columns on the roads, rumors thickening into schedules no one prints. Resistance cells grow bolder by becoming smaller. Messages travel inside loaves and among laundry. A boy on a bicycle pedals as if time were a slope. A woman with a shopping basket waits 6 minutes longer at a corner than custom allows and then, without looking up, walks in the other direction. You become a tributary to a river you do not see. You carry a note once, twice, and discover that fear has its own stride, somewhere between the stroll and the sprint. Then August comes, heavy as an oven. The city has been holding its breath for 4 years and now exhales into action. Workers in municipal garages put down their wrenches. Clerks in stifling offices step away from their desks and do not return. Printers feed paper into machines as if feeding a fire. On the 19th, the strike swells into a chorus trams idle where they stand. Postmen slip leaflets into mail slots with the same practiced motion as letters. Gendarmes look at their reflections in windows and decide what the next hour requires of them. The walls, so long colonized by the occupier's voice, bloom with handwriting aux armes, citoyens, on tient, we hold. Barricades grow out of Paris the way mushrooms grow from damp suddenly, insistently, everywhere. Chairs, paving stones, carts with one wheel and pianos with none. Wardrobes that used to keep secrets, now keeping soldiers. Everything that had a domestic purpose learns a street one. Children carry bricks with faces like saints. A woman in her 60s knots a scarf hard as a vow, hands out bottles she has filled as if bottling lightning. At Rue de Rivoli, you help drag a panel of cast iron into place and feel how a single movement can widen your shoulders. The city that learned to queue learns to block. Gunfire writes its jagged cursive across boulevards you know by heart. The first salvo makes the air taste of new coins. Then the rhythm finds you rattle, answer, run, crouch, wait. A panzer noses through an intersection like a bad decision. You fit yourself into a doorway as if the building were a coat you could borrow. Resistance fighters, some in mismatched parts of old uniforms, some in shirt sleeves, move with the purpose of people who have rehearsed speeches and now must deliver them without microphones. From bell towers where pigeons once congregated, ropes creak, cloches ring the city onto its feet. The Hôtel de Ville becomes headquarters for a faith that no longer needs to speak softly. Flags appear from trunks and tablecloth drawers, hastily stitched, beautifully crooked. Photographs will later show crowds with their mouths open in elegant oaths of joy. But standing beneath the fluttering tricolor, you hear the notes themselves raw, wobbly. Right. Radio voices that were once the occupier's throat are filled now with vowels that belong to you ici Paris. La lutte continue. Citoyens. Tenez bon. You listen with your whole skin. The Germans fight as a retreating sea fights, dragging at ankles, pulling at anything not moored. Snipers watch from windows you used to admire for their geraniums. Volleys snap out of attics. Tanks grind barricades into grammar mistakes. There are names you will never forget because blood learned their syllables. Odéon, Concorde, the dark tangle of a Saint-Michel. Then the sound you have been saving, a corner of your heart for engines from the south with a different pitch, a joy that recognizes itself through noise. Leclerc's second armored begins to arrive, first rumors, then dust, then armored vehicles with white stars that look like clean nouns in a long sentence. They roll up the boulevards with a mixture of swagger and exhaustion. A boy clambers onto a turret and plants a paper flag with 2 hands. A woman throws flowers and then claps the hand that threw them to her mouth, as if to keep the century from rushing out. A man in a cap that belonged to his father at Verdun salutes without irony. A girl kisses a stranger and then laughs into her palms. The paradoxes of the occupation, the measured silence, the masks, the cautious smiles evaporate like the spilled alcohol in August heat. You feel lighter and heavier at the same time. Surrender has places and papers, you will not see them. You will know it by the way the sound changes. Shots dwindle to single stubborn notes. Shouts become instructions again. Keep left, watch the corner, water. And church bells stop declaring emergency and start, in that old way, telling time. The tricolor goes up officially and the unofficial flags do not come down. The city decides to be embroidered. At Notre Dame, the bells ring until the metal itself must be tired. People pour inside for a mass of Thanksgiving fighters beside housewives, priests beside mechanics, hands ungloved for the first time in years. You stand in the nave and breathe stone, wax, gun oil, perfume. The organ finds a chord that remembers home. The next day, de Gaulle walks the Champs-Élysées, tall as a sentence balanced on one breath. Shots ring from a window, the crowd ripples, and then closes again around a procession like water that chooses not to remember a stone. You do not love the man, or you do. Either way, in that moment he looks like the part of France that refused to bow its head, even when it had to lower its eyes. The Arc de Triomphe does what arches do, gives the sky a frame and makes people larger as they pass through it. Liberation is also inventory. There are reckonings without judges, men dragged to corners, lists read aloud with justice in too rough a voice to be fully trusted, fists where courts should be. Women accused of horizontal collaboration are shorn in public squares. You watch one stand while the scissors do their work. Her lipstick remains perfect until a hand smears it. You feel two truths at once, a need for the war to leave the bodies it used to inhabit, and the knowledge that humbling one head cannot lift another. A neighbor grips your arm and says, "They had a choice." You answer nothing for a long minute because you remember the shelf with 3 jars, the middle one empty, and the months when choice was a word for other people. In the first nights after, blackouts end as if someone had auctioned the dark off and no one bid. Curtains open with the shy flourish of debutantes. Windows learn to glow again. On your table, a lamp makes a circle in which you can see the crust of your bread and the lines in your palm. The radio plays a waltz without apology. You dance in place with no partner and discover that the floorboards remember how to carry joy. Outside, someone has found a phonograph and wound it to breaking. The needle sings through scratches and still finds melody. The air smells of smoke and soap, a new mixture what burned and what is being cleaned. There are gaps you cannot fill. Names whispered during the occupation do not answer now. Doors you used to glance at just to be sure of them keep their shutters closed. Letters begin to arrive from places whose names taste of iron, some brief, some lies that tried to be comfort and failed, some the gracious silence of never knowing. You stand on a bridge and say 2 names aloud, softly enough that only the river hears, and you imagine that all along its length other people are doing exactly the same thing, like a choir that has learned to sing without wanting applause. Ration cards do not vanish with flags. The black market does not fold itself into a drawer marked shame and forget. Coal is still a sum you do on your fingers. Sugar is still a story. But there's a difference under the arithmetic. The numbers belong to you again. When a siren wails now, it means an ambulance for a living person, not a timetable for fear. When a truck rumbles past your building at dawn, it is a delivery, not a verdict. When a street sweeper turns the tap on his cart and water spills onto the cobbles, it looks like blessing. You find the city in the small postures. A bookseller pulls tar paper from a shelf and reveals spines that have not felt light in years. A seamstress hangs dresses in the doorway, their hems even and proud. A waiter sets cups on saucers with a flourish that could be theater. A pianist opens a window before he plays. A woman ties a ribbon in her hair and does not hide it when boots pass, though the boots now are different boots. The clocks are reset to Paris time, not Berlin time, not London time, but the hour you grew up inside. It is 2 o'clock because Paris says so. On a bench in the evening, with the lamps doing their work and the river wearing the last honey of daylight, you think of all the ways the city stayed itself even when it was not allowed to say its name out loud, in the way bread is divided, in the respect given to a poem, in the joke whispered at the wrong time, in the hand that found another hand in the dark. You remember the boy with the star holding his books like bricks? You imagine him older, walking faster. You remember the woman who smuggled sausage into her handbag. You picture her opening a cafe where the cups are always hot. You remember the violin floating out of a window when windows were not supposed to be open. You hope the player is somewhere loud. Hello and good evening, you had said at the beginning, promising a gentle walk into a hard night. Now you turn back toward home under a sky with fewer secrets. Blackout curtains are folded, perhaps to be cut into aprons. Boots still echo, but they are not the only footsteps. A neighbor laughs, and it does not sound like something stolen. You close your door and do not lock it twice. The city lies down, not conquered, not compliant, but tired and awake at the same time, learning how to sleep in freedom. You lower the lamp and listen to the ordinary noises of a building alive, and the past becomes the quiet that lets the future be heard.